Just hours after signing my divorce papers, I sat on a first-class flight to Texas with my 2 children, leaving my cheating ex-husband with nothing but a fake life he thought he owned. Meanwhile, his entire family gathered at an upscale maternity clinic, waiting to hear his mistress' ultrasound results and celebrate the son he always wanted. Instead, the doctor handed them a medical file that left them entirely speechless, exposing a secret so humiliating it tore their perfect family to pieces. My name is Naomi. I am 32 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my ex-husband and his family inflicted. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who mistook your silence for weakness. The heavy oak doors of the Fulton County Courthouse closed behind me with a hollow thud. Inside the arbitration room, the air conditioning hummed loudly, but the real chill came from the other side of the mahogany table. My pen scratched steadily across the final page of the divorce settlement. I did not hesitate. I did not shed a single tear. Across from me sat Darius, my soon-to-be ex-husband, wearing a custom-tailored navy suit that I had paid for. He was smirking, leaning back in his leather chair like a man who had just won the lottery. Beside him, his high-priced attorney looked equally satisfied, completely unaware that the victory they were celebrating was nothing but a fragile illusion. Darius honestly believed he had outsmarted me. The settlement stated that I was walking away from our marriage with what looked like empty hands. I had willingly surrendered my claim to the massive 5-bedroom suburban house in Alpharetta, and I had let him keep the brand-new Audi SUV he loved to parade around town. To Darius and his family, this meant I was a defeated woman running away in shame. They had no idea that the house and the car were completely owned by my corporate entity TechCore Empire. Darius thought they were marital assets. I let him keep his delusions because fighting over toys was an absolute waste of my time when I was busy playing chess. Sitting directly behind Darius in the gallery row was his mother, Brenda. She wore a wide-brimmed church hat and clutched her designer purse, looking at me with pure disdain. Brenda had never liked me. To her, I was too quiet, too simple, and not flashy enough to be a Washington wife. She preferred women who loudly displayed their wealth, women like Chloe. Chloe was 25 years old, wildly ambitious, and currently carrying the child that ended my marriage. As I flipped to the last page of the document, Brenda leaned forward. She did not even bother to lower her voice. "A good man needs a woman who knows her place, Naomi," she whispered, her tone dripping with venomous satisfaction. "At least Chloe is giving this family a real Washington air. You could not even do that right." My hand paused for a fraction of a second over the signature line. I looked up and met her gaze. Her eyes were hard, daring me to react, daring me to cause a scene so she could call me an angry, bitter woman. Tasha, my sister-in-law, sat next to Brenda, filing her nails and rolling her eyes. Beside Tasha, her husband Andre stared awkwardly at the floor, sweating slightly in his tight collar. Andre always looked uncomfortable at family gatherings, but today he seemed especially jittery, constantly checking his phone. I looked back down at the paperwork. I did not argue. I did not cry. I did not beg for respect. Respect is not something you ask for. It is something you command. I simply signed my name in a smooth, elegant script. I placed the pen down on the table, stacked the documents neatly, and pushed them across to the mediator. "It is done," I said, my voice completely steady. Darius let out a loud, arrogant chuckle. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, and flashed that charismatic smile that had fooled me a decade ago. "It did not have to be this way, Naomi," he said, shaking his head in mock pity. "But you always were too stubborn for your own good. Enjoy starting over from scratch. Tell the kids I will swing by to see them whenever my schedule frees up." I stood up, straightening my understated beige blazer. I smoothed away an invisible piece of lint from my sleeve. "I will be sure to let them know," I replied calmly. "Enjoy your new life, Darius." I turned on my heel and walked out of the arbitration room, the sound of my heels echoing sharply against the marble floors of the courthouse hallway. I felt a tremendous weight lifting off my shoulders with every step I took. For 5 years, I had quietly built my software company from a small local operation into a national supplier while letting Darius play the role of the successful provider. He loved the applause, and I loved the peace. But his ego had grown out of control, leading him straight into Chloe's arms. Now, he was about to learn the true cost of his lifestyle. The Atlanta heat hit me the moment I pushed through the heavy glass exit doors. The thick, humid air felt like a warm embrace, welcoming me back to freedom. I walked toward the VIP parking area, where a black luxury SUV with tinted windows was waiting for me. My private driver stood by the open door, ready to take me to my next destination. Before I could reach the vehicle, I heard the familiar, irritating sound of Tasha calling my name. "Wait up, Naomi!" she shouted, jogging across the pavement in her towering heels. She crossed her arms over her chest, looking me up and down with a condescending sneer. I stopped and turned to face her. "Yes, Tasha," I asked, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. She gestured toward the street. "I just wanted to see if you needed a ride to the bus stop. I know you gave up the Audi to my brother, so I assume you are taking public transit back to whatever hood you plan on moving into. It is a shame, really. You had a good thing going with Darius. Now you are just another single mother struggling to get by." I looked at Tasha, recognizing the deep insecurity hiding behind her aggressive words. She and Andre lived in a cramped apartment, constantly struggling to keep up appearances. She projected her own fears onto me, desperately hoping I would validate her superiority. I smiled at her, a genuine, relaxed smile that clearly unsettled her. "Thank you for the offer, Tasha," I said softly. "But my ride is already here." I pointed to the idling black SUV. The driver stepped forward respectfully, tipping his hat to me. Tasha stood shocked as she took in the expensive vehicle and the professional driver. Before she could formulate another insult, I stepped into the spacious, air-conditioned cabin where my two children were waiting safely, buckled into their seats, playing quietly on their tablets. I closed the door, shutting Tasha and her toxicity out of my life forever. "Take us to Hartsfield Jackson, please, David," I told my driver. As the SUV glided smoothly onto the highway, heading toward the airport, I pulled my iPad from my leather tote bag. The children were completely engrossed in their games, unaware of the massive shift that had just occurred in our lives. I opened my secure banking portal, entering my credentials with practiced precision. The screen loaded, displaying the master dashboard for TechCore Empire LLC. For the past 5 years, Darius had enjoyed a platinum corporate credit card linked directly to my operational accounts. I had allowed it because it kept him happy and out of my way while I scaled the business. He used it to pay for his custom suits, his lavish dinners, his expensive watches, and eventually his hotel rendezvous with Chloe. He thought it was a joint marital account fueled by his mediocre sales commissions. He never bothered to read the bank statements or understand where the money actually came from. Navigating to the authorized users section of the portal, Darius' name sat at the top of the list, right above a staggering monthly spending limit. My finger hovered over the screen for a brief moment. I thought about his mother Brenda sitting in that courthouse, mocking my inability to give them an heir. I pressed the big red button marked Revoke Access immediately. Instantly, Darius' entire financial lifeline was severed. I closed the iPad and quickly boarded a Delta first-class flight to Houston, Texas, leaving my toxic past safely behind in the clouds. The descent into Houston brought a sense of absolute clarity that I had not felt in over a decade. The heavy gray clouds parted to reveal the sprawling Texas landscape below, stretching out like a canvas of endless possibilities. The moment we landed, the stifling, oppressive energy of Atlanta vanished completely, replaced by the warm and welcoming embrace of the Texas sun. A sleek charcoal town car waited for us right outside the private terminal. The driver greeted me with a respectful nod, handling our minimal luggage with swift, silent professionalism. My children chattered excitedly in the back seat, pointing at the towering palm trees and massive highway overpasses as we drove toward our new reality. They had no idea about the financial and emotional storm I had just unleashed back east, and I intended to keep it that way. Their innocence was my greatest treasure, and I would protect their peace at all costs. We approached the private gated community in Sugarland where my true sanctuary awaited. The heavy wrought iron gates swung open smoothly, granting us entry into a prestigious neighborhood defined by lush manicured landscapes and absolute unbothered privacy. Our town car glided up the extended circular stone driveway and stopped in front of a magnificent Spanish-style estate. Valued at over $3 million, the property was a masterpiece of architectural design featuring a sweeping terracotta roof, pristine white stucco walls, and a grand arched entryway flanked by mature ancient oak trees. It was a stark, breathtaking contrast to the suburban house I had left behind in Georgia. That house had been a forced compromise, a modest choice I made to keep Darius comfortable with his fragile ego and mediocre income. This estate, however, was a pure reflection of my actual reality and the relentless hard work I had put into my business over the past 5 years. The children burst out of the car the moment the heavy doors opened. They ran up the wide stone steps, their joyous laughter echoing through the expansive open courtyard. Inside the house was bathed in warm, natural light, pouring through massive floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the grounds. Without waiting for instructions, the kids kicked off their travel shoes, dug their swimsuits out of their carry-on bags, and sprinted straight for the backyard oasis. I walked slowly through the grand foyer, feeling the cool, polished marble beneath my feet, and dropping my leather tote onto a sleek console table. Stepping out onto the covered veranda, I watched my children jump excitedly into the sparkling infinity pool that seamlessly overlooked a serene private lake. The water splashed brightly in the late afternoon sun, and for the first time in 10 years, my chest expanded with a profound, untainted sense of peace. There were no harsh, unfair criticisms from Brenda echoing in the halls. There was no suffocating arrogance from Darius poisoning the air. We were finally free. My phone vibrated sharply in my pocket, pulling my attention away from the peaceful aquatic scene. It was a secure call from my chief operating officer, Elias. He was the only person besides my strict legal team who knew the full extent of my financial portfolio and the intricate, ruthless moves I was making behind the scenes to protect my assets. "Welcome to Texas, Naomi," Elias said, his voice crisp and exceptionally professional over the encrypted line. I assume the arbitration paperwork in Atlanta was finalized without any unexpected issues or delays. "Signed, sealed, and delivered," I replied, leaning against the cool stone balustrade of the veranda and watching a heron glide over the lake. Darius took the bait exactly as we anticipated. He walked away thinking he completely won the house and the car in the settlement. He has absolutely no idea that TechCore Empire holds the deeds and the leases for both properties. Elias let out a low, appreciative chuckle that crackled through the speaker. "The corporate eviction team is on standby for early Monday morning. The towing company has already been dispatched to retrieve the Audi. But we have more pressing matters to discuss regarding the southern expansion. The acquisition of the Southern Logistics and Distribution Network is moving into the final stages. Their board of directors reviewed our updated proposal, and they are incredibly eager to close the deal by next week. This acquisition was the undisputed crown jewel of my strategic master plan. Purchasing that specific distribution network would not only triple the operational capacity of TechCore Empire, but it would also give me direct, unquestionable ownership of the parent company where Darius was currently employed as a mid-level sales representative. I had spent years building my massive wealth in the shadows, allowing Darius to play the role of the big traditional provider, while I quietly orchestrated a multi-million-dollar empire from my home office. Draft the final acquisition contracts. Elias, we instructed, watching my daughter splash joyfully in the shallow end of the pool. Make sure every single clause is completely bulletproof. I want full executive control the exact moment the ink dries on that paper. Consider it done, Elias replied with unwavering confidence. Enjoy your weekend, Naomi. You have certainly earned the rest. While I stood on my balcony overlooking my private lake, enjoying the sweet, unbothered taste of true independence, A completely different scene was unfolding back in Alpharetta. Hundreds of miles away in the backyard of the house, Darius erroneously believed he owned the humid evening air, was thick with the smell of cheap charcoal and misplaced arrogance. Darius was hosting a massive celebratory family cookout to commemorate his victorious divorce. The backyard was packed with his noisy fraternity brothers, loud extended family members, and gossiping neighborhood friends, who eagerly consumed the expensive catered food and premium liquor I had unknowingly funded through the corporate account. Darius stood by the massive stainless steel outdoor grill, wearing a designer polo shirt, holding a craft beer in one hand and a pair of silver tongs in the other. He was completely in his element, basking in the unearned attention and adoration of his peers. He laughed loudly, tossing his head back, as he spun a highly fictionalized dramatic tale of the morning arbitration session. "I am telling you, man," she practically begged to keep the house, Darius boasted to a group of his fraternity brothers who were nodding along in blind admiration. But I put my foot down hard. I told her straight to her face that a real man keeps his castle. She walked out of that courthouse with nothing but the clothes on her back and a harsh, painful reality check. She was just too boring, too ungrateful to appreciate a top-tier provider like me. Now she has to figure out how to survive in the real world while I upgrade my entire life. The men chuckled, raising their red solo cups in a rowdy toast to his newly reclaimed bachelorhood, completely ignoring the fact that his entire lavish lifestyle was entirely dependent on a corporate expense account that I had forcefully frozen hours ago. The sliding glass door of the patio opened, and Chloe stepped out into the sticky Georgia heat. She wore a tight floral sundress, specifically chosen to highlight her newly visible baby bump. She carried a large glass pitcher of fresh lemonade, smiling sweetly as she played the role of the perfect new lady of the house. Chloe relished the sudden attention, walking with an exaggerated sway, ensuring that every single guest noticed her presence. She desperately craved the validation of the Washington family, eager to permanently secure her spot in their upper-middle-class social circle. "Look at my beautiful queen, Darius," announced, projecting his voice across the yard, wrapping a heavy arm around Chloe's waist and pulling her close for everyone to see. "Giving me the strong, healthy son this family actually deserves." Chloe giggled, burying her face in his shoulder, acting exactly like the submissive, admiring prize Darius had always demanded. She had absolutely no idea that the luxurious ground beneath her designer sandals was about to violently crumble. A few feet away, sitting under the generous shade of a large patio umbrella, Brenda was holding court with the church aunties. She vigorously fanned herself with a woven hand fan, her chest puffed out with absolute immense pride. Brenda loved nothing more than a captive audience, and today she had a perfect one. "It is truly a magnificent blessing from the Lord," Brenda declared loudly, making sure her sharp voice carried over the sound of the generic rhythm and blues music playing from the outdoor speakers. "My boy finally freed himself from that dull, lifeless woman." Naomi never knew how to properly honor a strong, successful black man. But the Lord works in mysterious, wonderful ways. He closed one stubborn door and opened a beautiful, prosperous window. Aunt Shirley leaned forward, sipping her iced sweet tea with genuine curiosity. "When is the baby due, Brenda? I know you must be absolutely thrilled to finally have a grandson to carry on the family legacy." Brenda beamed, her proud smile stretching from ear to ear. "We are heading to that exclusive VIP maternity clinic in Buckhead first thing Monday morning," she bragged, smoothing down the fabric of her expensive linen skirt. Darius booked the premium suite for the diagnostic ultrasound. "We are going to hear my grandbaby's strong heartbeat and start planning the ultimate luxury gender reveal party. The Washington name is going to carry on with pure excellence. I always knew my perfect son was destined for greatness." Tasha sat on the edge of the plush patio furniture, picking aggressively at a plate of potato salad. She glared at Chloe silently, assessing the younger woman's cheap sandals and obvious fast fashion jewelry. Tasha was deeply judgmental and constantly compared her own life to everyone else around her. Even though she despised me, she could not hide her immense snobby disdain for Chloe. "You would think the new lady of the wonderful house could afford a decent pair of shoes," Tasha muttered under her breath, stabbing a piece of potato with her plastic fork. Standing directly next to her, Andre remained entirely silently rigid. He did not join in the loud laughter. He did not raise his glass to toast Darius' fake victory. Andre gripped his cold beer bottle so tightly, his knuckles turned completely white. Heavy sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cooling shade of the patio awning. His panicked eyes darted nervously around the busy yard, occasionally landing on Chloe's prominent baby bump before quickly looking away in sheer terror. He kept checking his phone screen, his foot tapping anxiously against the concrete patio floor. Andre was traditionally a smooth talker who usually commanded the center of attention at these family gatherings, but today he was a silent ghost, hovering desperately in the background, terrified of the ticking time bomb he had personally helped create. The illusion of victory in that Alpharetta backyard was dialed up to the absolute maximum threshold. They were feasting, laughing, and shamelessly celebrating their successful theft of my life. Darius felt like an invincible king who had just conquered a brand new glorious kingdom. Brenda felt like the victorious matriarch who had finally ousted the unworthy, inadequate daughter-in-law. Chloe felt like she had firmly secured a lifetime luxury meal ticket. They were entirely wrapped in their shared collective delusion, floating ridiculously high on a fragile cloud of stolen resources and deeply misplaced arrogance. They had absolutely no idea that the bank had already permanently cut the financial cord. They had no idea that the legal eviction notices were already printed and out for delivery. They had no idea that the highly anticipated VIP ultrasound appointment on Monday morning would not deliver a joyful celebration, but rather a catastrophic, undeniable revelation. The massive crash was coming rapidly, and the staggering height of their current arrogance was only going to make their inevitable dramatic freefall perfectly and beautifully satisfying. Monday morning arrived with a crisp breeze that did nothing to cool the inflated egos of the Washington family. The Sunrise Maternity Center, located in the most exclusive commercial district of Buckhead, Atlanta, was not a standard medical facility. It was a luxury wellness spa designed specifically for the ultra-wealthy. The floors were cut from imported Italian marble, reflecting the soft golden light radiating from custom crystal chandeliers hanging in the lobby. Classical music played at a barely perceptible volume, creating an atmosphere of absolute elite privilege. This was the exact type of establishment Darius craved to validate his false sense of superiority. He strutted through the heavy glass double doors, as if he owned the entire building, completely oblivious to the fact that the credit card on file for today's premium ultrasound suite belonged entirely to TechCore Empire. Darius wore a sharply tailored charcoal gray suit with a crisp white shirt, intentionally leaving the top two buttons undone to project a relaxed but wealthy aura. He walked slightly ahead of the group, leading his entourage like a conquering general. Chloe walked closely beside him, clinging to his left arm. She wore a tight maternity dress that hugged her growing belly, perfectly accessorized, with a bright smile she hoped would secure her permanent position in this family. Following closely behind them, Brenda marched with the righteous authority of a queen mother. She wore an ostentatious royal blue pantsuit, complete with a matching fascinator hat that would have been better suited for a royal wedding than a medical appointment. Tasha and Andre brought up the rear, presenting a stark contrast in body language. Tasha walked with her chin held high, her eyes scanning the room to ensure everyone was adequately impressed by their arrival. Andre dragged his feet, keeping his head down and his shoulders hunched, appearing as though he were walking toward a firing squad rather than a joyous family celebration. Brenda did not waste a single second asserting her dominance. She marched straight past the comfortable velvet waiting chairs and planted herself directly in front of the sleek, curved reception desk. The receptionist, a polished young woman in smart medical scrubs, offered a polite professional greeting, but Brenda immediately spoke over her. "We are the Washington family," Brenda announced, her voice echoing loudly across the hushed waiting room. ensuring that every other expectant mother and wealthy partner in the vicinity heard her clear as a bell. My son Darius Washington has the VIP Platinum Suite booked for this morning. We are here to see my grandson. It has been a long time coming, but my boy is finally getting the true heir to carry on our strong family name. He is having a son, and we need your absolute best staff attending to us today. The receptionist maintained her perfectly trained smile, typing smoothly into her computer system. Of course, Mrs. Washington. We have the Platinum Suite prepared for you. If you will all just have a seat in the lounge, our senior nurse will be out to collect you shortly. Brenda sniffed loudly, turning around to face the room with a look of supreme satisfaction. She practically glided over to the most central seating area, claiming the largest velvet sofa for herself and patting the space next to her for Darius. Tasha gracefully lowered herself into a plush armchair across from Chloe, crossing her legs and carefully arranging her authentic designer handbag on her lap. She took a long, slow sip from her complimentary sparkling water before turning her sharp, critical gaze directly onto Chloe. Chloe had tried her best to look the part of a wealthy executive partner today, but to a trained snob like Tasha, the cracks in her presentation were glaringly obvious. Tasha's eyes locked onto the bag resting near Chloe's feet. It was a mass-produced imitation piece crafted from stiff synthetic leather with overly shiny gold hardware that screamed discount department store. "That is an interesting bag, Chloe," Tasha purred, her voice dripping with condescension, masked as casual conversation. "Is it new? I do not think I have ever seen that specific collection before. It is very bold." Chloe flushed immediately, tucking her feet closer to the bag in a vain attempt to hide it from Tasha's piercing scrutiny. "Oh yes, it is a recent purchase," Chloe stammered, forcing a nervous smile. "Darius bought it for me last week to celebrate the baby." Tasha let out a soft, breathy laugh, tilting her head in mock sympathy. "How sweet," she replied, dragging out the words to maximize their patronizing effect. "Darius always was so charitable. He loves helping people step up in the world. Just be careful with that hardware, honey. Those cheap zippers tend to tarnish so quickly in this humid Atlanta weather. You would not want anyone thinking you do not belong here." Chloe bit her lower lip, her eyes darting toward Darius for backup, but Darius was too busy typing on his smartphone, completely ignoring the psychological warfare happening right in front of him. He was too absorbed in projecting his own image to care about defending the woman carrying his supposed child. While Tasha systematically dismantled Chloe's fragile self-esteem, Andre remained entirely separated from the group. He chose a seat at the furthest edge of the waiting area, pressing his back firmly against the wall, as if hoping the plaster would swallow him whole. The luxurious air conditioning of the clinic was running at full blast, yet beads of heavy sweat continuously gathered along Andre's hairline. He repeatedly pulled a crumpled handkerchief from his pocket, wiping his forehead and the back of his neck with frantic, jerky motions. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, darting erratically between Chloe's prominent baby bump and the heavy wooden doors leading back to the examination rooms. Andre held his phone tightly in his trembling hands, waking the screen every 10 seconds to stare blankly at the time. His right leg bounced uncontrollably, hitting the leg of his chair in a rapid, rhythmic thud that betrayed his mounting terror. He knew exactly what was growing inside Chloe's stomach. He knew the timeline. He knew the risks they had taken during their reckless secret encounters while Darius was supposedly working late. Andre had spent the entire weekend desperately trying to convince himself that Chloe had been with Darius enough times to make the child biologically his. But watching the undeniable reality of this medical appointment unfold, Andre felt the crushing weight of absolute doom pressing down on his chest. He was a man standing on a trapdoor waiting for the lever to be pulled. Darius finally looked up from his phone, completely oblivious to the intense tension suffocating his family. He stretched his arms out along the back of the velvet sofa, projecting the image of a perfectly relaxed, victorious patriarch. He turned to his mother, smiling warmly. "Do not worry, Mom," Darius said loudly, ensuring his voice carried to the neighboring chairs. "After today, We are going to plan the biggest gender reveal party Atlanta has ever seen. We will rent out a country club. We will get catering. We will show everyone exactly what a real Washington family looks like. The nightmare is over. I finally have a woman who understands her role and gives me exactly what I deserve. Brenda patted his knee affectionately, her eyes shining with blind devotion. You always deserve the best, Darius. The Lord removed that dead weight from your life so you could fly high. This baby is going to be the absolute pride of our entire lineage. Their mutual delusion was almost poetic. They were sitting in a clinic paid for by my money-wearing clothes purchased with my credit, boasting about a lifestyle sustained entirely by my hard work. They were celebrating their cruel triumph over me, completely unaware that their entire universe was currently resting on a foundation of gasoline, and they were happily striking matches. A set of heavy frosted glass doors swung open, and a senior nurse dressed in immaculate navy scrubs stepped into the waiting lounge. She carried a sleek digital tablet and wore a warm professional smile. Darius Washington, she called out, her voice cutting through the soft classical music. We are ready for you in the Platinum Ultrasound Suite now. Darius stood up instantly, buttoning his suit jacket with a sharp, practiced motion. He reached down and offered his hand to Chloe, pulling her up from her seat with a dramatic show of chivalry. Let us go meet my son, he announced proudly, puffing out his chest. Brenda leaped up from the sofa, grabbing her designer purse, while Tasha elegantly rose to her feet, smoothing her skirt. Andre stood up slowly, his knees visibly shaking, looking absolutely terrified as he trailed behind the confident march of his in-laws. The Platinum Ultrasound Suite was a massive room designed to feel more like a high-end theater than a medical examination area. Soft ambient lighting illuminated the space, which featured a plush examination bed in the center and a curved leather sectional sofa for family viewing. A massive high-definition flat-screen monitor was mounted on the far wall, ensuring that every person in the room would have a perfect, unobstructed view of the ultrasound images. Chloe was guided to the examination bed by the nurse, who expertly helped her recline and adjusted the pillows for her comfort. Darius pulled a rolling stool right next to the bed, sitting exceptionally close to Chloe and taking her hand in his. He looked back at his mother and sister, flashing a smug, triumphant grin. Brenda took the center seat on the leather sofa, clasping her hands together in prayerful anticipation. Tasha sat beside her, pulling out her phone to record the momentous occasion for her social media followers. Andre remained standing, lingering near the heavy wooden door, gripping the brass handle tightly as if he might bolt down the hallway at any given second. The nurse applied the warm gel to Chloe's stomach, chatting amiably about the weather while she prepared the equipment. The room was filled with a sense of electric anticipation. Darius stroked Chloe's hand, projecting the image of a deeply devoted father, ready to welcome his legacy into the world. He was literally practically glowing with unearned pride. The door to the suite opened with a quiet click, and Dr. Evans walked into the room. He was a distinguished older gentleman with silver hair, wearing a crisp white lab coat over a tailored shirt and tie. He had a calm, authoritative presence that immediately commanded respect. Dr. Evans offered a polite nod to the family gathered on the sofa before stepping up to the medical console beside the examination bed. Good morning, everyone, Dr. Evans said, his tone professional and measured. It is wonderful to see so much family support today. He picked up the digital tablet the nurse had left on the counter and began to scroll through the medical file. The room fell completely silent, the only sound being the soft hum of the ultrasound machine and the faint rustle of Brenda shifting excitedly on the leather sofa. Darius squeezed Chloe's hand, looking up at the doctor with bright, arrogant eyes. We are ready whenever you are, Doc Darius stated confidently. Let us see, my boy. Let us show the world the newest Washington. Dr. Evans continued to scroll through the digital file, his brow furrowing slightly as he absorbed the information on the screen. He stopped scrolling. His eyes remained fixed on the tablet for several long, agonizing seconds. He read the entry once and then read it again. The warm, professional smile he had carried into the room slowly faded completely from his face. The ambient lighting of the luxury suite suddenly felt incredibly stark and cold. Dr. Evans lowered the tablet and looked directly at Darius. The atmosphere in the room completely shifted instantly, transforming from a joyous celebration into a suffocating absolute vacuum of silence. Dr. Evans cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence that had suddenly gripped the room. He blinked a few times, his professional mask slipping back into place as he set the digital tablet down on the stainless steel counter. He decided to proceed with the visual examination before addressing whatever he had just read in the administrative file. He picked up the ultrasound wand and applied it smoothly to Chloe's gel-covered stomach. Instantly, the massive high-definition flat-screen monitor on the wall flickered to life, displaying the grainy black and white image of the womb. The nurse pressed a button on the console, and a rapid, rhythmic thumping sound filled the luxurious suite. It was the undeniable sound of a strong fetal heartbeat. The room erupted into a chorus of joyful noise. Brenda threw her hands up toward the ceiling, her eyes squeezed shut as she loudly praised the Lord for this miraculous blessing. She rocked back and forth on the leather sofa, thanking God for finally giving her son a true Washington heir. She loudly proclaimed that this child was destined for greatness, repeating how this heartbeat was the sound of a new beginning for their prestigious lineage. Tasha held her smartphone high, panning the camera across the room to capture every single moment of this supposedly historic family milestone. She made sure to get a close-up shot of Darius, who was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Darius stared up at the screen, his chest heaving with exaggerated emotion. He slowly reached up and wiped a single perfectly timed tear from the corner of his eye, making absolutely sure Tasha caught his sensitive side on video. He squeezed Chloe's hand, whispering how proud he was, how this was the greatest day of his life, and how he could not wait to teach his son how to be a king. Chloe beamed under the attention, her anxieties completely melting away as she soaked in the validation she had so desperately craved. She looked at Darius with pure adoration, entirely convinced that her future in high society was permanently secured. Even Andre managed a weak, strained smile from his spot by the door, though he was still gripping the brass handle like a lifeline. The delusion in the room had reached its absolute zenith. They were completely intoxicated by their own fabricated reality, celebrating a child that represented their ultimate victory over my departure. Dr. Evans expertly captured several measurements on the screen, clicking the mouse to save the images to the secure clinic database. He pointed out the tiny developing limbs and the curve of the spine, maintaining a polite bedside manner. Darius puffed out his chest, pointing at the screen and bragging to his mother about how the baby already had his strong profile. Brenda agreed enthusiastically, clapping her hands and declaring that the boy would undoubtedly be a handsome heartbreaker, just like his father. The doctor handed Chloe a soft towel to wipe the clear gel from her stomach and turned back to the medical console. The rapid thumping of the heartbeat continued to play through the surround sound speakers, providing a rhythmic, continuous soundtrack to the room. Dr. Evans picked up his digital tablet once again, his silver eyebrows pulling together in a tight, confused frown. He tapped the screen a few times, bringing up the comprehensive medical history files required for the clinic's mandatory paternity and genetic screening paperwork. The high-end facility prided itself on extreme thoroughness, ensuring all biological records were completely verified before establishing long-term pediatric care plans. Dr. Evans adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Darius. His voice was calm, clinical, and completely devoid of the celebratory warmth from moments ago. Mr. Washington, I am currently reviewing the medical records transferred from your urologist to complete the standard paternity intake forms, Dr. Evans stated. He paused, looking from the illuminated tablet to Darius, and then back to the tablet. I need to ask you a clarifying question, because there seems to be a highly significant discrepancy in our files. Darius maintained his arrogant smirk. He draped his arm casually over the side of the examination bed, completely unfazed by the doctor's serious tone. Go ahead, Doc, Darius said loudly, ensuring his voice carried for Tasha's recording. Whatever you need to know, just ask. I am an open book. There are no secrets in this family. Dr. Evans took a slow, deliberate breath. His posture remained perfectly rigid as he addressed the room. The records indicate that you underwent a surgical procedure 4 years ago, Mr. Washington, specifically a full irreversible bilateral vasectomy. Darius faltered slightly, but he kept his confident posture, assuming this was just a standard medical checklist that needed a quick explanation. Yeah, that is right, Darius replied, waving his free hand dismissively. I had it done a while back when I was married to my ex-wife. She was always nagging me about family planning, so I just took care of it to get her off my back. But obviously these things can fail or reverse themselves, right? I mean, we are looking at the proof right there on the screen. He pointed proudly toward the monitor where the image of the baby was still frozen in high definition. I guess my genetics are just too strong to be stopped by a simple surgery. Dr. Evans did not smile. He did not nod in agreement. He simply looked at Darius with a mixture of professional pity and absolute bewilderment. Mr. Washington, vasectomies do have a microscopic failure rate, Dr. Evans explained, his voice cutting cleanly through the heavy, humid air of the room. However, we requested your most recent post-operative laboratory results from your urologist to complete this genetic profile. You submitted a routine semen analysis sample just 6 months ago during your annual physical. The laboratory results from that specific test were completely conclusive. Darius lowered his arm. The arrogant smirk finally melted off his face, replaced by a sudden creeping shadow of confusion. What does that mean? Darius asked, his voice suddenly lacking its usual booming confidence. The swagger that had defined his entire existence was rapidly evaporating. It means, Dr. Evans stated clearly, refusing to break eye contact, that your vasectomy was entirely successful and remains fully intact. Your recent lab results showed an absolute 0 sperm count. There is no possibility of a reversal or a surgical failure. It is biologically and medically impossible for you to father a child. The words hung in the air, suspended in time. The rhythmic thumping of the fetal heartbeat continued to broadcast loudly over the clinic speakers, filling every corner of the luxurious suite. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was deafening. It was the undeniable sound of life, but it was no longer a sound of victory. It was the sound of complete, absolute betrayal. A heavy, suffocating silence crashed down upon the Washington family. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. The camera slowly panned to Darius' face. All the color rapidly drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. His jaw hung slack, his eyes wide and vacant, as his brain desperately tried to process the medical impossibility presented to him. He slowly turned his head to look at the monitor, staring at the pulsing white blip on the black screen, and then he slowly turned his head to look down at Chloe. On the leather sofa, Brenda stopped praising the Lord. Her hands froze mid-air before dropping heavily to her sides. The expensive designer purse she had been proudly clutching slipped from her grasp and hit the imported marble floor with a sharp, loud smack. The noise echoed like a gunshot in the silent room, but no one even flinched. Brenda stared at the doctor, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to form words that simply would not come. Her grand illusions of a Washington heir, her dreams of rubbing this child in my face, were instantly incinerated. The proud legacy she had been boasting about just moments ago was entirely fabricated. Beside her, Tasha lowered her smartphone. The screen was still recording, capturing the exact moment her brother's fake empire imploded, but Tasha was too paralyzed to press stop. She looked at Chloe with a mixture of pure shock and mounting furious rage. The cheap handbag on the floor suddenly made perfect sense. Chloe was not a prize. She was a devastating, humiliating liability who had just made an absolute mockery of their entire family. Tasha realized that they had been celebrating a massive deception. Chloe shrank back against the examination bed pillows, pulling the hospital gown tightly around her shoulders. Her face was flushed dark crimson with absolute terror. She stared at Darius, her eyes pleading for a lifeline that no longer existed. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some sort of explanation or excuse, but only a small, pathetic gasp escaped her throat. She looked exactly like a trapped animal surrounded by predators who had just realized she was the prey. The luxurious life she had envisioned was slipping through her trembling fingers, and standing by the heavy wooden door, Andre remained entirely motionless. He had stopped sweating. He had stopped tapping his foot. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution order being signed. He stared at the floor, refusing to look at his wife, refusing to look at his mother-in-law, and absolutely refusing to look at the pregnant woman sitting on the examination bed. He knew the truth, and now the scientific proof was echoing through the room. The booming sound of the heartbeat continued to fill the sterile room, mocking them all. It was the only sound permitted in the vacuum of their collective shock. In a matter of 60 seconds, the doctor had surgically removed every single lie Darius had built his ego upon. He did not own a mansion. He did not own a luxury car. He did not have a corporate expense account. And now the final ultimate truth had been delivered. He was not a father. He was just a hollow, empty man who had thrown away a loyal wife for a woman who was carrying another man's child. The silence in the room stretched on, heavy and toxic, waiting for the inevitable catastrophic explosion. The heavy, toxic silence snapped with a sudden, violent force. Darius let out a sound that was half gasp, half animalistic growl. The polished, confident executive vanished in an instant, replaced by a man whose entire identity had just been publicly eradicated. He kicked the rolling medical stool away with such force that it crashed loudly into the sleek cabinetry, sending a tray of sterile instruments clattering to the imported marble floor. Dr. Evans and the senior nurse instinctively stepped back, pressing themselves against the far wall as the luxury maternity suite transformed into a volatile war zone. Darius lunged toward the examination bed, his face contorted in absolute fury. He slammed his hands down on the mattress on either side of Chloe, trapping her. His broad shoulders blocked out the soft ambient lighting, casting a dark, menacing shadow over her trembling form. He leaned in so close that she could feel the heat of his ragged breaths. "Who is it?" Darius roared. The sheer volume of his voice shook the room completely, drowning out the rhythmic thumping of the ultrasound monitor. "Whose baby is that, Chloe? Who have you been sleeping with while spending my money?" Chloe scrambled backward, her bare shoulders hitting the cold, hard wall behind the examination bed. The sanitary paper crinkled loudly underneath her as she tried desperately to put distance between herself and Darius. She was hyperventilating, her hands flying up to protect her face. The bright, triumphant smile she had worn just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by an ugly mask of pure terror. She looked wildly around the room, searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. Darius did not back down. He leaned in closer, the veins in his neck bulging against his crisp white collar. "I gave you everything," he screamed, saliva flying from his lips. "I bought you that designer trash you wear. I put a roof over your head. I left my wife for you. You looked me in the eye and told me this was my son. Give me a name right now, or I swear I will make you wish you never met me." Before Chloe could even attempt to form a coherent syllable, Brenda snapped out of her paralyzed state. The shock that had frozen the matriarch melted away, revealing a vicious, ugly wrath. Brenda kicked her drop designer purse out of the way and marched up to the bed, standing shoulder to shoulder with her enraged son. She pointed a sharp, manicured finger directly at Chloe's face. "You deceitful little tramp!" Brenda hissed, her voice vibrating with a toxic, religious fury. "You sat in my house. You ate at my dining table. You looked me in the eyes and let me praise the Lord for a grandson that belongs to some other man. You are nothing but a common street rat trying to steal a Washington legacy. I always knew you were trash. You thought you could trap my boy with a lie. Tell us the truth right now." Tasha was not far behind. She lowered her smartphone, the screen finally going dark, and stepped up to flank Chloe on the other side. The passive-aggressive shade she had been throwing in the waiting room escalated into direct, aggressive intimidation. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "We want a name," Tasha demanded, her voice sharp as glass. "You thought you were so smart, flaunting your little bump, parading around like you had won the jackpot. You played my brother for a fool. You are going to tell us exactly who you spread your legs for, or we are going to leave you here with absolutely nothing. We will take back the car, we will cancel the apartment lease, and we will ruin you." Chloe was completely surrounded. Darius hovered over her screaming. Brenda stood to her left shouting insults. Tasha stood to her right, hurling threats. The three of them formed an impenetrable wall of rage. Chloe burst into loud, ugly sobs. Black mascara streamed down her flushed cheeks, ruining her carefully applied makeup. She clutched the thin hospital gown to her chest, completely broken. The luxurious life she had so desperately clawed her way into was disintegrating before her very eyes. She had gambled everything on Darius, never verifying his medical history, and she had lost spectacularly. In her sheer panic, Chloe's tear-filled eyes darted wildly around the room. She looked at the furious faces of the Washington family, realizing that they were about to throw her out onto the street with absolutely nothing. She refused to take the fall alone. If she was going to lose her meal ticket, she was not going to let the man who helped create this mess walk away unscathed. Her frantic gaze bypassed Darius, bypassed Brenda, and bypassed Tasha. Her eyes shot straight across the suite and locked onto the heavy wooden door. Andre was standing there, his hand tightly gripping the brass door handle. He had successfully turned the latch, managing to pull the door open a fraction of an inch. He was holding his breath, trying to slip out of the room like a coward, while his wife and in-laws were distracted by the interrogation. He had almost made it. He was seconds away from disappearing down the hallway and escaping the clinic entirely. But Chloe saw him. "Tell them, Andre!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with absolute hysterical desperation. She pointed a shaking finger straight at the doorway. Her scream echoed off the sterile walls, piercing through the chaos. "Tell them it is yours. Tell them what we did." The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Darius stopped screaming. Brenda froze, her finger still pointing in the air. The words hit the room with the force of a physical shockwave. For one single fraction of a second, the entire suite plunged back into a deadly, suffocating silence. The only sound was the loud, relentless thumping of Andre's unborn child broadcasting from the ultrasound speakers. Tasha slowly turned her head. The movement was stiff, robotic, as if her brain was refusing to process the information her ears had just received. She looked at Chloe, her eyes wide and confused. Then she turned her gaze toward the doorway. Andre stood frozen like a deer caught in headlights. His hand was still on the brass handle, his body half turned toward the hallway. His face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated guilt. The heavy beads of sweat that had been gathering on his forehead now dripped down his face. He did not deny it. He did not say a word. The absolute terror in his wide, bloodshot eyes was a complete and undeniable confession. Tasha's mind rapidly connected the puzzle pieces she had blindly ignored for months. The late nights Andre claimed to be working at the office, the unexplained withdrawals from their joint savings account, the way he always seemed to know exactly what Chloe was doing or where she was, the sudden nervous behavior he had exhibited the entire morning. He had not been sweating because he was worried about Darius. He had been sweating because he knew he was the father. Her husband had been sleeping with her brother's mistress. A guttural, agonizing scream tore out of Tasha's throat. It was not a sound of anger, it was the sound of a woman's entire reality shattering into a million jagged pieces. The sophisticated, arrogant facade she worked so hard to maintain completely vanished. She snapped. Tasha lunged forward, her manicured hands outstretched, aiming directly for Chloe. She threw herself across the examination bed, grabbing a fistful of Chloe's hair and yanking hard. "You slept with my husband!" Tasha shrieked, her voice breaking into a hysterical sob. "You disgusting lying snake! I will kill you!" Total, absolute pandemonium erupted inside the VIP Platinum Suite. Chloe screamed in pain, trying to fight Tasha off, swinging her arms wildly and kicking her legs. Brenda shrieked, grabbing Tasha's waist, trying to pull her daughter back, but the sheer force of Tasha's adrenaline made her impossible to move. The medical tray overturned completely, scattering ultrasound gel swabs and expensive instruments across the floor. Dr. Evans and the senior nurse immediately sprang into action. "This is a medical facility. Dr. Evans shouted, his authoritative voice cutting through the screaming women. "Release her immediately, or I am calling building security and the police." The nurse grabbed the wall phone, dialing urgently for assistance. Andre did not stay to defend his wife. He did not stay to protect his unborn child or the woman carrying it. Seeing the absolute bloodbath unfolding in the center of the room, his survival instinct kicked into overdrive. He let go of the brass handle, shoved the heavy wooden door open with his shoulder, and bolted. He ran blindly down the pristine marble hallway, sprinting past startled patients and receptionists, abandoning his marriage, his family, and his dignity in a desperate, cowardly flight. Amidst the horrific screaming, the physical violence, and the chaotic intervention of the medical staff, Darius remained standing by the examination bed. He did not try to stop his sister. He did not try to help his mother. He did not chase after his treacherous brother-in-law. Darius was entirely paralyzed. He stood like a hollow statue, staring blankly at the wall. His arms hung limply at his sides. The charismatic, invincible aura he had worn into the clinic was gone, leaving behind a pathetic, broken shell. In less than 60 seconds, his entire world had been vaporized. The woman he threw his marriage away for was a manipulative liar. The child he thought was his legacy belonged to his own brother-in-law. The family he bragged about leading was currently engaged in a violent physical brawl in the middle of an upscale medical clinic. His pride, his new relationship, and his family were shattered beyond repair. He had absolutely nothing left. And he knew with sickening clarity that the boring, ungrateful wife he had discarded in an Atlanta courthouse was the only good thing he had ever truly possessed. The chaotic sounds of the clinic faded into a dull, meaningless buzz as Darius finally forced his legs to move. He turned his back on the horrific scene unfolding on the floor of the VIP Platinum Suite. He did not look back when Tasha shrieked his name. He did not stop when Brenda cried out for him to help pull his sister off the terrified pregnant woman. He simply walked away. He pushed his way through the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the pristine marble hallway. A team of security guards rushed past him, their radios crackling with urgent commands to secure the room he had just left. Darius ignored them completely. He walked down the corridor with the stiff, mechanical movements of a man sleepwalking through a waking nightmare. He stepped out of the Sunrise Maternity Center, and the oppressive Atlanta heat hit him like a physical blow. He handed his ticket to the valet without a word. When his sleek black Audi pulled up to the curb, he climbed inside and slammed the heavy door, shutting out the world. The leather interior of the car, which had always felt like a throne room, now felt like a suffocating cage. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned a stark bone white. His breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. The image of Andre standing in that doorway, the undeniable guilt written across his brother's-in-law face, burned itself into Darius' mind. Chloe had played him. His own family had betrayed him. The child he had been boasting about to every single person he knew belonged to the man married to his sister. Darius slammed his foot on the accelerator. The powerful engine roared to life and he sped out of the clinic parking lot. He needed a drink. He needed to wash the bitter taste of humiliation from his mouth. He needed to be somewhere that validated his existence, somewhere that reminded him he was still a king. He drove recklessly through the heavy mid-morning traffic, weaving between lanes, until he reached the heart of Buckhead. He pulled up to the valet stand of the Oak and Ember, an ultra-exclusive, high-end cigar lounge where he frequently entertained clients and boasted about his wealth. He tossed the keys to the surprised valet and marched up the stone steps. The heavy mahogany doors opened to reveal a sanctuary of dim lighting, rich wood paneling, and the thick aromatic scent of premium imported tobacco. The lounge was quiet at this hour, occupied only by a few wealthy businessmen conducting private meetings in the plush leather booths. This was exactly what Darius needed, an environment entirely crafted to cater to the elite. He strode over to his favorite secluded corner booth, dropping his suit jacket onto the leather cushion and loosening his silk tie. A distinguished bartender wearing a crisp white shirt and a black vest approached the table carrying a leather-bound menu. "Good morning, Mr. Washington." The bartender greeted him with practiced deference. "The usual today." "No," Darius replied, his voice harsh and gravelly. "Bring me a double pour of the Macallan 25-year. Neat. And get me a Cohiba Robusto, the good ones from the back humidor. Do not make me wait." The bartender offered a polite nod and quickly retreated to the bar. Darius leaned back against the tufted leather, closing his eyes and trying to slow his racing heart. He told himself he was fine. He was Darius Washington. He was a top-tier provider, a successful corporate executive, and a man who commanded respect. Chloe was nothing but a cheap, opportunistic mistake. He was the one who had discarded Naomi because she was too boring to keep up with his lifestyle. He was still the winner. He still had his money, his freedom, and his impeccable social standing. A woman like Chloe could never actually break him. He repeated these lies to himself like a desperate mantra, trying to rebuild the shattered walls of his ego. The bartender returned, placing a heavy crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid on the table alongside a freshly cut premium cigar. Darius did not thank him. He grabbed the glass and threw back half the whiskey in a single aggressive swallow. The alcohol burned a fiery trail down his throat, hitting his stomach with a heavy, comforting warmth. He lit the cigar, pulling the thick, acrid smoke into his lungs and exhaling a massive gray cloud toward the ceiling. He ordered another double pour before his glass was even empty. For 2 straight hours, Darius sat in the dim corner of the lounge, aggressively drinking away the pain and humiliation. He ignored the frantic phone calls lighting up his screen. Brenda called 14 times. Tasha called 6 times. He silenced the device, turning it face down on the polished wooden table. Eventually, the heavy drinking began to catch up with him. The sharp edges of the morning's betrayal started to blur, numbed by the expensive scotch circulating through his bloodstream. He checked his gold Rolex, noting that it was well past noon. It was time to leave. It was time to go back to his luxury apartment, regroup his thoughts, and figure out how he was going to spin this disaster to his social circle. He raised his hand, snapping his fingers sharply at the bartender to signal for the check. The bartender approached, carrying a small silver tray with a black leather billfold resting on top. He placed it gently on the table. Darius did not even bother to look at the itemized receipt. He knew it would be an exorbitant amount, and he wanted the bartender to see exactly how little he cared about the cost. With a practiced, arrogant flick of his wrist, Darius pulled his sleek, heavy metal corporate card from his designer wallet and dropped it onto the silver tray. The card hit the metal surface with a satisfying, authoritative clink. "Take care of it," Darius muttered, picking up his glass to finish the last drop of whiskey. "And add a 20% tip for yourself." "Thank you, Mr. Washington," the bartender said, picking up the tray and walking back to the register station. Darius stood up, straightening his shirt and brushing a stray piece of cigar ash from his trousers. He picked up his suit jacket, slinging it casually over his shoulder. He felt marginally better. The alcohol had successfully inflated his fragile pride. He was ready to walk out of the lounge and face the world again. He waited by the booth, expecting the bartender to return with the merchant copy for him to sign. 2 minutes passed. Darius tapped his foot impatiently. He looked over at the bar. The bartender was standing behind the register, staring down at the point-of-sale terminal with a deep frown. He swiped the heavy metal card again. He pressed a few buttons on the screen and waited. He then picked up the card and wiped the magnetic strip on his apron before inserting the chip directly into the machine. Darius let out an annoyed sigh and marched over to the bar. "Is there a problem?" he demanded, leaning heavily against the polished brass rail. The bartender looked up, his expression apologetic but tense. "I am sorry, Mr. Washington. Your card seems to be declining. The machine is giving me an error code." Darius scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes. "Your machine is broken. That is a premium corporate black card. There is no limit on that account. Run it again." "I have run it 3 times, sir," the bartender replied, his tone dropping its previous deference and becoming strictly professional. "It is declining every single time. Do you perhaps have another form of payment you would prefer to use? The total is $480. "I am not using another card." Darius snapped, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet lounge, drawing the attention of 2 businessmen sitting nearby. "I said the card is fine. Run it again." "I cannot run it again, sir. The terminal is now instructing me to retain the card. Darius felt a sudden cold spike of adrenaline pierce through his alcohol-induced haze. Retain the card. That was impossible. He was the primary account holder. He was the king of his domain. His absolute outrage boiled over. "Give me the card," Darius demanded, snatching it out of the bartender's hand before the man could stop him. "I will call the VIP concierge line right now and show you exactly who you are dealing with." Darius pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling slightly as he unlocked the screen and dialed the premium customer service number listed on the back of the metal card. He was so furious, so desperate to prove his wealth and status to the bartender and the watching patrons, that he slammed the speakerphone button, placing the phone flat on the wooden bar top for everyone to hear. The line rang twice before a crisp automated voice answered, followed immediately by a live representative. "Thank you for calling Executive Corporate Services. This is Sarah speaking. How may I assist you today?" "Listen to me," Sarah Darius barked, leaning over the phone. "This is Darius Washington. I am trying to pay a tab at a restaurant and your system is declining my card. I need you to lift whatever security hold you placed on my account immediately. This is completely unacceptable." "I apologize for the inconvenience," Mr. Washington, the representative, said, her voice perfectly calm and polite. "Please give me one moment while I pull up your profile." Darius glared at the bartender, crossing his arms over his chest. "See," he muttered. "Just a security hold. Probably thought the card was stolen because I am spending so much money." The line was silent for 30 agonizing seconds. The faint sound of typing could be heard through the speaker. Then the representative returned to the line. Her voice was no longer warmly accommodating. It was sharp, precise, and entirely absolute. "Mr. Washington, I have located the account," the representative stated clearly. "I apologize, but I cannot assist you with lifting any security holds." "Why not?" Darius yelled, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "I demand to speak to your manager. Do you know how much money I run through that account?" "I cannot assist you, sir, because you are no longer an authorized user on this account," the representative replied, her words cutting through the cigar lounge like a surgical blade. "The corporate account belongs entirely to TechCore Empire, LLC. The primary account holder, Naomi Washington, contacted our fraud department early this morning. She permanently revoked your access privileges and flagged your specific card as unauthorized. The account has been frozen to your profile, and your card has been permanently deactivated. You have zero access to these funds." Darius stopped breathing. The floor beneath his expensive leather shoes seemed to completely vanish. He stared at the phone sitting on the bar top, his mind entirely unable to process the catastrophic reality of those words. Naomi. Naomi had the account. TechCore Empire was her company. The realization crashed down on him with the devastating force of a freight train. The corporate expense account, the limitless credit, the luxury cars, the expensive dinners, it had never belonged to him. It had always been hers. She had funded his entire illusion of success while he played the arrogant fool. "Sir," the representative continued, her voice echoing painfully in the silent bar, "I am required to inform you that any further attempts to use that card will be reported as fraudulent activity. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Darius could not speak. His throat was completely paralyzed. He reached out with a trembling hand and hit the end call button, terminating the line. The silence that followed was the most humiliating moment of his entire life. He slowly looked up. The bartender was staring at him, his arms crossed over his chest. The two businessmen at the nearby table were watching the entire scene with thinly veiled amusement. The great Darius Washington was a complete and utter fraud, and now everyone in the room knew it. "Your tab is $480, the bartender stated, his voice completely devoid of any respect. "How will you be settling this today?" Darius frantically patted his pockets. He pulled out his personal wallet. He had exactly $40 in cash. His personal checking account, which he used strictly for minor expenses, had less than $200 in it. He had absolutely no way to pay the bill. The suffocating weight of total ruin crushed him. He had lost his mistress. He had lost his fake child. His family was in shambles, and now his ex-wife had completely annihilated his financial existence. "I do not have it," Darius whispered, his voice cracking. The invincible executive was entirely gone, leaving a pathetic, broken man standing at a bar he could no longer afford. The bartender narrowed his eyes. "You drank top-shelf liquor, sir. I will have to call the police if you cannot settle your tab." "No, wait!" Darius pleaded, genuine panic setting in. He looked frantically around the room and then looked down at his left wrist. The heavy gold Rolex glinted in the dim light. It was the watch he loved to flash in meetings, the ultimate symbol of his success. The watch Naomi had purchased for his birthday 3 years ago. With shaking, defeated hands, Darius unclasped the heavy gold band and slid the watch off his wrist. He placed it gently on the silver tray next to the useless, deactivated black card. "Keep it," Darius mumbled, staring at the floor, unable to meet the bartender's eyes. "It is worth 10 times the tab. Keep the change." Darius turned around and walked out of the cigar lounge. He did not strut. He did not puff out his chest. He walked with his shoulders slumped and his head bowed, stripped of every single lie he had ever told himself. The brutal, satisfying karma had finally arrived, and Darius Washington was officially and completely bankrupt. Darius stumbled out of the heavy mahogany doors of the Oak and Ember. The blazing afternoon sun hit his face with blinding intensity, forcing him to squint against the harsh light. He practically tore his valet ticket from his pocket, shoving it at the attendant with trembling hands. When his sleek black Audi glided up to the curb, he threw himself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. He gripped the leather steering wheel, his chest heaving as he desperately tried to outrun the catastrophic humiliation he had just endured. He needed the safety of his home. He needed to stand in the center of his massive living room and remind himself that he was still a king. He had won the house in the arbitration. He had the paperwork. Naomi had walked away with nothing. He just needed to get back to his castle and figure out how to fix the disastrous mess Andre and Chloe had created. He sped aggressively down the highway, weaving recklessly through the thick Atlanta traffic. The air conditioning blasted against his face, but a cold, clammy sweat continued to soak through his expensive tailored shirt. He pressed harder on the accelerator, his mind racing with frantic, disjointed plans. He would kick Chloe to the curb. He would deny everything to his social circle. He would host another lavish party at his estate to prove his status remained entirely intact. He just needed to get home. Darius turned sharply into his exclusive gated community, ignoring the speed bumps as he raced toward his property. He rounded the final corner, expecting to see his pristine manicured lawn and the grand facade of his suburban fortress. Instead, he slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching loudly against the pavement. Parked aggressively across his wide driveway were 2 massive commercial moving trucks. A team of men wearing heavy work boots and matching gray uniforms were marching in and out of the grand double doors of his house. They were carrying large cardboard boxes, heavy pieces of furniture, and rolled-up luxury rugs. They were systematically stripping the house completely bare. Darius threw the Audi into park, leaving the engine running, and leaped out of the vehicle. His absolute panic instantly morphed into explosive, unhinged rage. "What are you doing?" Darius roared, sprinting across the freshly cut grass. He waved his arms wildly, his face contorted into a mask of pure fury. "Put that down right now. You are trespassing on private property. I will call the police. I will have every single one of you arrested." The workers did not even flinch. They continued carrying a heavy velvet sofa down the front steps, completely ignoring his frantic screaming. A burly man, wearing a white hard hat and carrying a thick metal clipboard, stepped out from the grand foyer. He walked calmly down the stone steps, blocking Darius' path to the front door. He had the weary, unbothered expression of a man who dealt with hysterical evictions every single day. "Are you Darius Washington?" the foreman asked, his voice flat and thoroughly unimpressed. "Yes, I am," Darius yelled, puffing out his chest and stepping aggressively into the foreman's personal space. "I own this house. I won this property fair and square in my divorce settlement. You have exactly 10 seconds to put my furniture back and get your trucks off my lawn before I have you thrown in a jail cell. The foreman did not move a single muscle. He casually flipped open his metal clipboard and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents stamped with official red seals. He held the paperwork out toward Darius. "You do not own anything, Mr. Washington," the foreman stated calmly. "You never owned anything. This property is a luxury corporate rental leased exclusively under TechCore Empire, LLC. The chief executive officer of that company permanently terminated the lease agreement effective at 8 o'clock this morning. Since the corporate entity is no longer funding this residence, the property legally reverts back to the management agency. My team has been contracted to clear the premises and change the locks." Darius snatched the papers from the foreman's hand, his eyes darting frantically across the dense legal text. His brain simply refused to process the words on the page. He saw the official letterhead of TechCore Empire. He saw the strict corporate housing clauses, and right at the bottom of the final page, he saw the crisp, elegant signature of his ex-wife, Naomi. "This is fake," Darius stammered, his voice suddenly dropping to a hollow, terrified whisper. The paper shook violently in his hands. "This is a mistake. I paid the mortgage. I provided for this family. She was just a regular housewife." The foreman let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "I do not know what kind of fantasy you have been living, buddy, but the bank records do not lie. TechCore Empire paid every single dime for this estate. The electric bill, the water bill, the landscaping, even the premium cable package was billed directly to the corporate account. Your name is not on a single deed, title, or utility contract associated with this address. You were just an authorized guest, and your invitation has been officially revoked." While Darius stood paralyzed, staring blindly at the eviction notice, a loud mechanized whining sound cut through the heavy summer air. He slowly turned his head. A massive, heavy-duty tow truck had backed into the driveway, stopping inches away from the rear bumper of his idling Audi. A man in a high-visibility vest was quickly securing thick metal chains around the rear axles of the luxury vehicle. "Hey," Darius screamed, dropping the legal papers onto the grass and sprinting toward the tow truck. "What are you doing? Stop! That is my car." The tow truck driver flipped a heavy steel lever, and the hydraulic winch began to grind, pulling the sleek black Audi backward and lifting its rear wheels off the pavement. "I have a repossession order for this vehicle," the driver shouted over the loud, grinding noise. "This is a registered corporate fleet vehicle owned by TechCore Empire, LLC. The company reported the authorized user as terminated. I am impounding the vehicle on behalf of the corporate holding group. You cannot take it," Darius pleaded, his voice cracking with genuine hysterical panic. He grabbed the door handle, pulling on it, but the doors had already automatically locked. "My house keys are in there. My wallet is in there." "Take it up with your corporate office," the driver replied, completely unsympathetic. He climbed into the cab of the tow truck, slammed the heavy metal door, and shifted into gear. Darius could do nothing but stand on the hot asphalt and watch helplessly as his ultimate status symbol was towed away down the street, disappearing around the corner and leaving an empty stain of oil on his driveway. Darius slowly turned back toward the house. The moving team was finishing their final sweep. They were not loading his personal belongings into the commercial trucks. Instead, they were dragging heavy black trash bags out of the garage and dumping them unceremoniously onto the curb next to the street. He watched as bags filled with his designer suits, his expensive golf clubs, and his useless fraternity memorabilia piled up like common garbage. The foreman stepped out of the front door and inserted a brand new shiny brass key into the deadbolt. The lock clicked loudly, sealing the house forever. The foreman pocketed the key, tipped his hard hat toward Darius, and signaled for his team to pack up. Within minutes, the massive moving trucks rumbled down the driveway, leaving Darius standing completely alone on the edge of the manicured lawn. The Georgia heat was absolute and suffocating. The air was thick with humidity, pressing down on his chest like a physical weight. Darius looked up and down the pristine suburban street. The neighbors he had hosted just days ago, the same men who had toasted his bachelorhood and admired his fake kingdom, were now standing on their porches and peering through their front blinds. They were watching his total and complete annihilation with unabashed, morbid curiosity. There were no sympathetic faces. There was only the harsh, judgmental reality of high society witnessing a fraud being violently exposed. Darius reached into the pocket of his trousers. His fingers brushed against the crisp, folded edges of two $20 bills. $40. It was the absolute sum total of his entire existence. He had no credit cards. He had no bank accounts. He had no car. He had no home. His mother and sister were likely currently dealing with the police at the maternity clinic after their physical brawl. His pregnant girlfriend carried the child of his brother-in-law. The impressive lavish lifestyle he had bragged about to anyone who would listen had vanished like smoke in the wind. His legs finally gave out. The invincibility he had clung to for a decade completely shattered. Darius sank down onto the hot concrete sidewalk, leaning his back against one of the heavy black trash bags filled with his worthless possessions. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking as the monumental, staggering magnitude of his stupidity finally caught up with him. For 10 long years, he had genuinely believed he was the king of his castle. He believed his mediocre mid-level sales position was keeping their extravagant life afloat. He had mocked Naomi relentlessly for being dull, for staying inside her boring home office, for not matching his vibrant, outgoing energy. He had treated her like an unwanted accessory, a stepping stone he could easily discard the moment he found a younger, more submissive prize. But the truth was a bitter, agonizing poison. Her silence had never been dullness. It had been the quiet, relentless, and terrifying focus of a brilliant millionaire quietly building a massive corporate empire while he played dress-up with her money. She had constructed a beautiful, impenetrable fortress around him, letting him wear the crown and reap the praises of their social circle. She had given him the world on a silver platter. And the absolute second he disrespected her, the very moment he tried to humiliate her and replace her, she simply packed up her fortress and left him entirely to the wolves. He had thrown away a fiercely loyal, brilliantly successful woman who had secretly funded his entire ego. He had traded absolute security and genuine devotion for a gold-digging fraud and a fake legacy. As Darius sat on the curb surrounded by trash bags under the burning Atlanta sun with $40 to his name, he finally realized the catastrophic truth. Naomi had not lost the divorce. She had simply stopped paying for his delusions. And without her, he was absolutely, undeniably nothing. 900 miles away, the suffocating despair of Atlanta simply did not exist. The evening air in Houston, Texas, was crisp and electric, buzzing with the vibrant, unmatched energy of absolute triumph. The sprawling, magnificent estate of Kiara, Washington, was illuminated by thousands of warm fairy lights strung meticulously through the branches of ancient oak trees. A live jazz ensemble, composed entirely of incredibly talented local musicians, played a smooth, upbeat melody on the marble terrace, setting the perfect tone for the exclusive HBCU Alumni Gala she was hosting. The estate was a masterpiece of modern architecture and classic Southern elegance, boasting floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the shimmering surface of a massive infinity pool. Kiara moved through the elegant crowd like a seasoned queen holding court. She wore a breathtaking emerald green evening gown that draped perfectly against her silhouette, catching the soft ambient light with every step. The quiet, accommodating, and supposedly boring woman Darius had so foolishly discarded was completely and utterly gone. In her place stood an industry titan, radiating power, grace, and unbothered confidence. She held a crystal flute of imported champagne, sharing deep, genuine laughter with a circle of powerful investors, successful entrepreneurs, and lifelong friends who had supported her quiet ascent to the top. The catering staff moved seamlessly through the crowd, carrying silver trays of gourmet Southern fusion appetizers perfectly seasoned with her signature blends. Everywhere Kiara looked, she saw excellence. Brilliant doctors, sharp corporate lawyers, tech innovators, and real estate moguls filled her home. They were there to celebrate their shared heritage, their deep alumni connections, and most importantly, to witness the crowning achievement of the Soul Spice empire. Kiara felt a profound, deeply rooted sense of peace. The dead weight of her previous marriage had been surgically removed, freeing her to soar to heights she had previously only managed in secret. She was no longer hiding her brilliance to protect a fragile man's ego. The music gently faded as Kiara elegantly tapped her crystal glass with a silver spoon. The sharp, clear sound easily caught the attention of the crowded ballroom. Conversations paused, and a respectful, expectant silence fell over the gathered elite. Kiara gracefully ascended the two shallow steps onto the elevated staging area set up near the grand, sweeping staircase. The soft spotlight caught the sparkle of her diamond drop earrings, but her confident, secure smile was the brightest thing in the entire room. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Kiara began, her voice projecting clearly across the room, rich with warmth and undeniable authority. "When I started Soul Spice Empire, I had a simple but ambitious vision. I wanted to create something authentic, something that honored our culture, our roots, and our incredibly rich culinary history. I built it quietly from the ground up, pouring every ounce of my energy into making sure the business foundation was absolutely unbreakable." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the faces of her friends and esteemed colleagues. "For a long time, I let other people take up space in my life that they did not earn. I dimmed my own light to make others feel comfortable in the shadows. I funded illusions that did not serve my ultimate purpose." The crowd murmured in quiet, deep understanding, acknowledging the universal truth in her words. "But those days are entirely over," Kiara declared, her tone ringing with absolute, unwavering finality. "We do not shrink ourselves anymore. We expand, we conquer, we elevate our communities, and we build lasting legacies that cannot be stolen, compromised, or diminished by anyone." The ballroom erupted into spontaneous applause, and Kiara held up a hand to calm them, her smile widening into something fiercely triumphant. "Which brings me to the major announcement I promised you all tonight. The reason we are truly celebrating. As of an hour ago, Soul Spice Empire, LLC, has officially finalized negotiations for our largest expansion to date," Kiara announced, her voice echoing with pride. "We are no longer just a premium spice brand. We are acquiring the massive independent Southern food distribution plant located just outside the city limits. We are taking complete ownership of our entire supply chain from production and packaging straight through to distribution." The applause was deafening. Cheers and joyous shouts rang out across the polished marble floors. "This strategic acquisition makes us one of the largest independent distributors in the entire region." Kiara continued speaking over the enthusiastic crowd. "It secures our future and guarantees that our products will be prominently featured in every major grocery chain across the southern United States. We are no longer just asking for a seat at the table. We own the building." While the gala continued in full celebratory swing, Kiara quietly slipped away from the ballroom and walked down the quiet, plush-carpeted hallway to her private executive study. The heavy oak doors closed behind her, shutting out the party noise and leaving her in a serene, professional sanctuary. Her lead corporate attorney and the distribution plant executives were waiting patiently around a massive, polished mahogany conference table. The final acquisition document sat in a neat, thick stack, perfectly aligned in front of her high-backed leather chair. Kiara sat down gracefully, smoothing the fabric of her emerald gown. Her attorney offered her a warm, respectful nod and slid the signature pages forward, indicating the designated lines. Kiara reached into the inner pocket of her leather portfolio and withdrew a heavy, solid gold fountain pen. The metal was cool and substantial against her fingers, a physical representation of her hard-earned success. She uncapped the pen, placing the fine nib against the thick parchment paper. With a few swift, elegant strokes, she signed her name. Kiara Washington, Primary Account Holder, Chief Executive Officer. The dark ink dried almost instantly, sealing the multi-million-dollar deal and cementing her status as one of the most powerful, wealthy women in the industry. She placed the gold pen down and accepted a firm, enthusiastic handshake from the exiting owners. She had absolutely everything she had ever worked for, and nobody could ever take it away. 900 miles away, in a bleak, depressing corner of Atlanta, Darius was experiencing a very different kind of reality. There was no smooth jazz music playing in the background. There was no imported champagne flowing into crystal flutes. There was only the loud mechanical rattling of a broken window air conditioning unit, struggling to cool the oppressive heat inside Tasha's cramped two-bedroom apartment. The sophisticated executive who had aggressively demanded top-shelf whiskey earlier that morning was currently lying flat on his back on a lumpy, heavily stained microfiber couch. The apartment was a complete chaotic disaster. Cardboard boxes were strewn haphazardly across the floor, and the lingering, greasy smell of cheap fast food hung heavily in the stagnant air. Darius stared blankly at the yellowed popcorn ceiling, his eyes bloodshot hollow and completely devoid of life. He was still wearing the same wrinkled, sweat-soaked dress shirt from the clinic, the collar stained and the cuffs frayed. Tasha paced frantically back and forth across the tiny, cramped living room, clutching her cracked smartphone to her ear. Her face was streaked with ruined mascara, and her voice was hoarse from hours of hysterical screaming. She was leaving yet another desperate, threatening voicemail for Andre. Andre had not just run out of the maternity clinic to escape the family brawl. He had run straight to the nearest bank branch. By the time Tasha had managed to untangle herself from the violent physical altercation with Chloe and Brenda and access her mobile financial apps, Andre had completely and ruthlessly drained their joint savings accounts. Every single dollar they had to their names was gone. He had taken the money, blocked her number, and vanished entirely into the wind, leaving Tasha facing imminent eviction and absolute social ruin. She had a notice taped to her front door demanding 3 months of back rent that she could no longer pay. Darius did not even have the energy to tell his sister to stop pacing. He simply laid there listening to the broken springs of the cheap couch squeak in protest beneath his heavy weight. His stomach rumbled loudly, reminding him that he had not eaten a single thing since the night before. He had no money for food. He had no sleek metal corporate card to swipe. His luxury company car was currently sitting in a secured commercial repossession lot. His expensive tailored designer suits were sitting in black trash bags on a curb in his former elite neighborhood, likely already picked through by neighborhood scavengers. He slowly turned his head to look at his sister. Tasha finally threw her phone against the cracked drywall in a fit of absolute pure despair, sliding down to the cheap peeling linoleum floor and sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Their mother Brenda was not there to offer them empty religious platitudes or comfort them. She was currently sitting in a holding cell at the local police precinct, having been charged with simple assault and battery after viciously refusing to let go of Chloe's hair at the clinic. The invincible, untouchable Washington family had been entirely decimated in a single horrific afternoon. Darius squeezed his eyes shut tightly, wishing the floor would simply open up and swallow him whole. The stark, agonizing contrast between the luxurious life he had so carelessly discarded and the miserable, squalid reality he was currently living was physically painful. He remembered Kiara's quiet grace. He remembered the beautiful, secure, massive home she had built for them. He remembered the gourmet meals she cooked, the way she expertly managed their finances, the way she silently and efficiently handled every single crisis, so he could parade around the city, pretending to be the boss. She had never been boring or stagnant. She had been his shield, his sole provider, and his entire foundation. He had traded a fiercely loyal, powerful queen for a cheap, lying scammer and a fake legacy. He had thrown away a lifetime of guaranteed luxury and respect for a few pathetic months of shallow ego-stroking. And as a large brown cockroach scurried boldly across the stained carpet right in front of his face, Darius Washington finally understood the absolute devastating finality of his choices. He was completely broke. He was entirely homeless. He was a public laughingstock. And he was going to spend the rest of his miserable, ruined life sleeping on a stained couch, paying the ultimate permanent price for his unmatched arrogance. The crushing realization of having absolutely nothing gnawed at his sanity for exactly 5 minutes before his towering, indestructible ego violently rejected the narrative. Darius wiped the cold, clammy sweat from his forehead and forced himself to stand up from the stained microfiber couch. He ignored Tasha, who was still sobbing hysterically on the peeling linoleum floor, mourning the joint savings account her treacherous husband had drained. Darius could not afford to care about his sister's impending eviction. He had to save himself. He was a premier corporate executive, a man of immense talent and undeniable charm. He simply refused to believe that his entire existence could be wiped out in a single afternoon. He just needed to pivot. He needed to find a new lucrative position, leverage his extensive industry contacts, and rebuild his kingdom from the ground up. He pulled his cracked smartphone from his pocket. His hands were trembling slightly as he opened the LinkedIn application. He intended to scroll through his premium network to find an old colleague or a competing firm that would blindly hire him based on his fabricated resume. He refreshed his feed, swiping past the usual corporate humblebrags and mundane industry updates. Suddenly, his thumb froze, hovering over the cracked glass screen. Dominating his entire feed was a sponsored, highly promoted article from Black Enterprise magazine. The headline was printed in bold, aggressive typography that seemed to leap off the screen and punch him directly in the throat. Soul Spice CEO Kiara Washington acquires Southern distribution giant. Darius stopped breathing. The blood roared in his ears, completely drowning out the rattling hum of Tasha's broken air conditioning unit. He stared at the high-definition cover photo attached to the article. It was Kiara. She was standing in what appeared to be a breathtaking private executive study. She wore a stunning emerald green evening gown that exuded absolute royalty. Her posture was commanding, her expression radiating a fierce, untouchable power. She held a heavy, solid gold fountain pen poised elegantly over a thick stack of legal acquisition documents. She looked like a billionaire. She looked like a conqueror. She did not look anything like the quiet, accommodating, and supposedly boring woman he had so foolishly discarded in an Atlanta courthouse. His eyes darted frantically down to the text of the article, scanning the paragraphs with mounting horror. The prestigious business magazine detailed the meteoric rise of the Soul Spice empire, praising Kiara's brilliant strategic mind and her unbreakable grip on the culinary market. But it was the third paragraph that caused the room to violently spin around him. The article proudly announced that Soul Spice Empire, LLC, had officially finalized the total acquisition of Apex Southern Logistics. Darius felt his knees buckle, and he collapsed heavily back onto the squeaking springs of the ruined couch. Apex Southern Logistics was the massive parent conglomerate of the exact regional sales firm where he was officially employed. It was the company that signed his actual paychecks, the firm where he worked as a mid-level sales rep, before he began living entirely off Kiara's unlimited corporate expense accounts. He had convinced himself that once the dust settled, he could simply march back into his regional sales office and demand a promotion based on his tenure. That option was entirely eradicated. Kiara did not just cancel his corporate black card. She did not just terminate the lease on his suburban mansion or impound his luxury fleet vehicle. She had systematically purchased the entire supply chain. She had bought the supreme parent company. Kiara Washington, the woman he had publicly humiliated and traded for a lying scammer, was now his ultimate overarching boss. She owned the executives who managed the directors who supervised him. She held his entire professional future in the palm of her elegantly manicured hand. The normal human response to this catastrophic discovery would be profound shame and immediate surrender. But Darius was not burdened by normal human logic. His toxic narcissism kicked into absolute overdrive, desperately spinning the narrative to protect his shattered pride. "She did this for me," Darius whispered to the empty room, a slow, delusional smile creeping across his face. His twisted mind began to rapidly connect dots that did not exist. Kiara could have bought any distribution plant in the country, but she specifically chose the one connected to his employment. She was trying to get his attention. She was angry, absolutely, but anger was just a manifestation of deep, lingering passion. She was flexing her incredible financial muscles to show him exactly what he was missing. If she genuinely did not care about him, she would have simply ignored his existence. This massive corporate acquisition was a direct personal message. She wanted him back. She wanted him to see her power and come crawling back to her estate to beg for forgiveness. Even if she was entirely done with him, Darius reasoned, his smile growing wider. He still held a massive trump card. Kiara hated public drama. She despised scandal gossip and anything that threatened her pristine professional reputation. If he showed up at her lavish Houston estate and threatened to make a massive, humiliating scene in front of her elite new social circle, she would panic. She would do anything to protect her brand. She would write him a massive 7-figure settlement check just to make him sign a non-disclosure agreement and go away. Whether through toxic romantic manipulation or direct reputational blackmail, Darius was going to get his money back. He just needed to get to Houston. He jumped off the couch, patting down his pockets with renewed frantic energy. He had $40 in cash. It was completely insufficient for a last-minute commercial flight to Texas. He needed capital immediately. He stripped off his ruined suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves. He unfastened his heavy custom-engraved gold cufflinks. He slid the diamond-studded tie clip from his silk tie. He unbuckled his expensive designer belt, pulling it rapidly through the loops of his trousers, leaving Tasha wailing on the floor. Darius bolted out of the apartment and sprinted down the concrete stairs of the complex. He jogged 3 miles through the unforgiving, humid Atlanta heat until he reached a rundown strip mall featuring a brightly lit pawn shop. The interior smelled of stale smoke and desperation. Darius slammed his designer accessories onto the scratched glass counter, demanding premium prices. The weary broker behind the metal cage barely glanced at the items before offering him a pathetic fraction of their retail value. Darius argued loudly, his voice echoing in the cramped shop, but he possessed absolutely zero leverage. He snatched the meager stack of $20 bills and stormed out, his pride sustaining yet another brutal injury. It was still not enough for a plane ticket. He needed one more source of funding. He needed his mother. Darius navigated the public transit system until he reached the local police precinct. He paced the hot pavement outside the station for an hour until the heavy glass doors finally opened. Brenda walked out looking entirely disheveled. Her pristine church outfit was wrinkled. Her carefully styled hair was a chaotic mess, and her face was set in a deep, furious scowl. She had just been released on a minor bail bond posted by a reluctant, sympathetic church deacon who was waiting in a sedan by the curb. Mom, Darius shouted, jogging over and grabbing her by the shoulders. "Listen to me, I need money right now. I need a flight to Houston." Brenda slapped his hands away, her eyes blazing with toxic wrath. "Are you out of your mind, Darius? I just spent 4 hours in a holding cell because of that street rat you brought into my family. My reputation at the church is completely ruined. I do not have any money for you." "You do not understand," Darius insisted, his voice dropping to a frantic conspiratorial whisper. "Kiara is a billionaire. I just saw the news. She bought a massive company. She bought my company. She is sitting on a mountain of cash, Mom. If I can get to her house, I can fix this. I can charm her into taking me back. And if she refuses, I will threaten to expose our entire marital history to the press. I will threaten to ruin her new pristine corporate image. She will pay me millions just to disappear. We can get everything back. We can be rich again. I just need a plane ticket." Brenda's furious scowl slowly faded, replaced by the familiar, calculating greed that had defined her entire life. She looked at her son, her mind rapidly processing the manipulative scheme. The prospect of losing her status had been terrifying, but the prospect of extorting a newly minted billionaire ex-daughter-in-law was an entirely different game. "Are you absolutely sure you can corner her?" Brenda asked, her voice dropping low. "I know exactly how she thinks," Darius lied confidently. "She is weak when it comes to public perception. I will not leave her property until she cuts a check." Brenda hesitated for only a second, before reaching into her undergarments and pulling out a small, hidden, zippered pouch. She extracted a tightly folded stack of emergency cash she kept hidden from her own church congregation. She shoved the money into Darius' hands, her eyes narrowing with vicious intensity. "Do not fail me, Darius," she hissed. "You get to Texas and you wring every single cent out of that woman. She owes this family for leading you on." Darius grabbed the cash, offering a sharp nod of confirmation before sprinting toward the nearest transit station. He arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, sweating and completely disheveled. He bypassed the premier first-class lounges he used to frequent and marched directly to a budget airline counter. He slammed the wrinkled cash onto the desk, demanding the next available seat on a flight to Houston. An hour later, Darius found himself crammed into a tiny middle seat in the very back row of a budget commercial airplane. His knees pressed painfully against the seat in front of him, and the stale, recycled air smelled faintly of cheap coffee and anxiety. It was a massive, humiliating downgrade from the private corporate jets Kiara had quietly funded for him, but he refused to let the indignity break his focus. As the plane violently shuddered through turbulence, taking off into the darkening sky, Darius closed his eyes and meticulously crafted his exact strategy. He visualized the grand Houston estate. He imagined pushing his way past her security, pretending he still owned her heart. He practiced the exact devastating combination of fake apologies and subtle reputational threats he would use to trap her. He was absolutely convinced that his toxic charisma would prevail. He was Darius Washington, and he was going to reclaim his empire, even if he had to tear Kiara's entire world apart to do it. The commercial flight touched down in Houston with a violent mechanical jolt that perfectly mirrored the chaotic, ruined state of Darius' mind. He scrambled off the cramped budget aircraft, pushing past exhausted passengers with frantic, aggressive shoves. He had survived the humiliating flight by fueling his rage, feeding his toxic ego with visions of reclaiming his stolen throne. But as soon as he stepped out of the climate-controlled airport terminal, the brutal reality of his situation struck him. Houston, in the middle of summer, was an entirely different beast than Atlanta. The Texas heat enveloped him immediately, like a wet, heavy, suffocating blanket. The humidity was oppressive, instantly pulling a fresh layer of sweat from his pores. His previously immaculate designer suit was now a tragic, wrinkled disaster. The fabric clung uncomfortably to his damp skin, and the collar of his once crisp white shirt was stained a faint, sickly yellow from hours of nervous sweating. He looked exactly like the desperate, broken man he was, but his towering narcissism completely refused to acknowledge the physical reality of his reflection in the terminal glass. He pulled out his cracked phone. His frantic internet searches during the flight had revealed a crucial piece of information. Kiara was not at her sprawling private estate tonight. She was hosting a monumental corporate launch party at the Crystal Pavilion, which was widely known as one of the most exclusive, ultra-luxury venues in downtown Houston. Darius navigated the unfamiliar city using public transit and walking the final dozen blocks simply to conserve the last $20 bill remaining in his pocket. The towering glass and steel architecture of downtown Houston loomed high above him, reflecting the vibrant, colorful city lights against the dark night sky. When he finally reached the corner across from the Crystal Pavilion, the sheer staggering magnitude of the event hit him like a physical blow. The street in front of the venue was completely shut down to regular traffic. A continuous fleet of black luxury town cars, Bentleys and Rolls-Royces lined the block. Valets in crisp white uniform jackets scrambled to open doors for stunning women in designer evening gowns and powerful men in bespoke tailored tuxedos. A massive, heavy velvet rope cordoned off the grand main entrance where a team of imposing security guards equipped with earpieces cross-checked every single guest against a digital VIP list on glowing tablet computers. Darius stood across the street, hiding in the dark, humid shadows of a concrete parking garage. His chest heaved as he watched the elite crowd flow into the building. He knew with absolute certainty that he could never walk through those front doors looking like a vagrant. His name was certainly not on that digital list. He circled the perimeter of the massive venue, his frantic eyes scanning the architecture until he spotted the service entrance situated in a narrow, brightly lit alleyway. Several large catering vans were parked haphazardly against the brick wall, with workers rapidly unloading towers of silver warming trays and heavy wooden crates of premium imported champagne. Darius slipped quietly into the alleyway, blending his movements into the frantic, rushing rhythm of the event staff. He spotted a young, exhausted catering waiter taking a quick, unauthorized smoke break near a stack of empty plastic crates. Darius approached the young man, smoothing his wrinkled tie in a pathetic, desperate attempt to look authoritative and wealthy. He pulled out the last remaining $20 bill he possessed. He fabricated a rapid, desperate lie claiming he was a key corporate investor whose luggage had been lost by the airline and who had been unfairly locked out by an overzealous security guard at the front gate. The young waiter took a long drag of his cigarette. He looked at the wrinkled, sweaty $20 bill, then looked up at Darius' desperate, manic face. The kid clearly saw right through the lie, but he simply did not care enough to argue. He shrugged, snatched the cash from Darius' hand, and tossed him a spare black catering vest that had been draped over a crate. The waiter pointed a lazy finger toward the chaotic service kitchen and turned his back. Darius quickly slipped the black vest on over his ruined shirt, using it to cover the worst of the sweat stains. He grabbed an empty silver serving tray from a nearby stack, holding it up in front of him like a polished metal shield. He marched through the heavy double-service doors, his heart hammering wildly against his ribs. The industrial kitchen was a loud, blisteringly hot maze of shouting executive chefs and rushing servers. The air was thick with the rich scent of seared Wagyu beef and truffle oil. Darius kept his head down, navigating the gleaming stainless steel prep tables with singular focus until he spotted the heavy velvet swinging doors that led directly into the main ballroom. He pushed his shoulder against the velvet and stepped through, leaving the kitchen behind. The transition from the loud, abrasive service kitchen to the grand ballroom was entirely jarring. Darius immediately pressed his back against a massive marble pillar, completely overwhelmed and paralyzed by the breathtaking opulence surrounding him. The Crystal Pavilion was an absolute masterpiece of modern luxury. Massive crystal chandeliers cascaded from the high vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, rich golden glow over the enormous space. Dozens of tables draped in heavy black velvet were adorned with towering, extravagant white orchid centerpieces. The air was cool and crisp, thick with the subtle scent of expensive perfume and imported cologne. A live orchestra played a smooth, sophisticated melody from a raised balcony, filling the room with an atmosphere of total, unquestionable success. But it was the crowd that truly paralyzed him. This was not a regular corporate gathering or a simple networking event. This was a summit of absolute, undisputed power. And standing in the very center of the room, radiating an invincible magnetic energy, was Kiara. She was a vision of absolute triumph. She wore a stunning, custom-tailored white evening gown that fit her flawless silhouette, perfectly contrasting beautifully with her rich brown skin. Her hair was styled elegantly, sweeping over one shoulder, and heavy diamonds caught the chandelier light at her neck and wrists. She was not serving anyone. She was not standing quietly in the background making sure everyone else was comfortable. She was commanding the entire room. Darius watched in stunned, absolute silence as the mayor of Houston approached Kiara, greeting her with a warm, familiar embrace that spoke of deep mutual respect. Top-tier tech executives, powerful local politicians, and legendary real estate investors orbited around her, desperate for just a moment of her attention. They hung on her every single word, laughing heartily at her jokes and nodding respectfully whenever she spoke. She exuded a relaxed, effortless authority that left Darius utterly breathless. This was the woman he had called boring. This was the woman he had dismissed as a simple, uninspired housewife. She had built a massive corporate empire right under his nose while he played video games and bragged to his friends. And now she was reigning over her kingdom like a seasoned, untouchable queen. The stark, humiliating contrast between Kiara's glowing, magnificent victory and his own pathetic, sweaty reality should have broken him completely. It should have sent him running back out through the service doors to hide in the dark alleyway forever. Any rational man would have seen the vast, unbridgeable gulf between them and walked away in shame. But Darius was not burdened by normal human logic. The toxic parasitic narcissism that had defined his entire life simply refused to accept defeat. His massive, fragile ego violently rejected the reality of his own insignificance. He stared at the powerful, wealthy men surrounding her and felt a sudden, ugly surge of possessive, furious jealousy. That was his wife. That was his money. That was his empire. She belonged to him. He was the man who had molded her. Darius slowly lowered the silver serving tray, placing it silently onto a nearby empty table. His dark eyes locked onto the main stage set up at the far end of the ballroom. A sleek, transparent acrylic podium stood in the center of the platform, featuring a silver microphone waiting for the keynote address. Darius' mind began to race, formulating a plan so incredibly unhinged and desperate that only a man entirely disconnected from reality could believe it would actually work. He knew exactly how Kiara operated. He knew she hated public scandal more than anything else in the world. She had spent years meticulously cultivating a flawless professional reputation. She protected her corporate brand with ruthless, aggressive efficiency. If he approached her privately right now, she would simply signal her massive security guards to throw him onto the street. He would be entirely voiceless and powerless. But if he commanded the stage, everything would change. If he took control of that microphone in front of the mayor, the local press, and her elite investors, she would be completely trapped. He would play the role of the heartbroken, desperate returning husband. He would fabricate a beautiful, tragic story about losing his way and crossing the country with nothing just to beg for her forgiveness. He would paint himself as a vulnerable, passionate man deeply in love, making a grand romantic gesture. He would put her on the spot in front of hundreds of the most important people in her industry. She would have absolutely no choice but to smile, play along, and accept his public apology to avoid a massive, humiliating scene that would forever ruin her corporate launch. Once she accepted him publicly to save face, she would be forced to negotiate with him privately behind closed doors. He would corner her. He would force her to write him a massive seven-figure settlement check to keep his mouth shut, or better yet, his toxic charm would manipulate her into taking him back entirely. He would step right back into the luxurious life she had built. Darius took a deep, shaky breath. He stripped off the black catering vest, tossing it carelessly onto the polished marble floor. He smoothed his wrinkled suit jacket, running a trembling hand over his sweating forehead to clear his vision. He fixed his posture, puffing out his chest and channeling the arrogant corporate persona he had worn like armor for the last decade. He was going to hijack this event. He was going to hijack her entire life. He stepped out from behind the marble pillar. He began to walk slowly around the perimeter of the crowded room, keeping to the shadows to avoid the security detail, his eyes fixated entirely on the silver microphone waiting on the stage. He timed his movements perfectly, using the loud, swelling crescendo of the live orchestra to mask his rapid approach. At the front of the room, the crowd naturally parted as Kiara made her way toward the acrylic podium, holding a fresh glass of imported champagne. An audio-visual technician wearing a heavy headset stood at the base of the stairs, holding a secondary wireless microphone, ready to hand it over for her official toast. Darius saw his golden opening. He lunged forward, shoving past a startled corporate investor and snatching the heavy black microphone directly out of the technician's hands before the young man could even register the sudden movement. The technician let out a shout of surprise, reaching for his empty hand, but Darius was already moving. He vaulted up the two carpeted steps, completely bypassing the velvet ropes and stepping directly into the harsh, blinding glare of the main spotlight. He stood right in the center of the platform, intercepting Kiara before she could even reach her podium. The effect was instantaneous and incredibly jarring. The live orchestra, confused by the sudden unscripted intrusion, stuttered to a chaotic, clumsy halt. The bright, cheerful chatter of hundreds of Houston elites died in the span of 3 seconds. A heavy, dead, and deeply uncomfortable silence crashed over the massive ballroom. Guests lowered their champagne flutes, staring in utter shock at the sweaty, disheveled man standing aggressively on the main stage. Darius gripped the microphone, his knuckles turning white. He stared out at the sea of wealthy, powerful faces, the very people he felt he inherently deserved to be among. He took a slow, shaky breath, intentionally adjusting his posture to project pure, raw vulnerability. The arrogant, aggressive bully who had screamed at his pregnant mistress in an Atlanta clinic was instantly buried. He summoned a lifetime of manipulative sales tactics, stepping perfectly into the role of the heartbroken, destroyed husband. "I am so sorry to interrupt this beautiful evening," Darius began, his voice echoing loudly through the state-of-the-art sound system. He forced a thick, emotional tremor into his words, leaning into the microphone, like a man carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. "My name is Darius Washington. I am Kiara's husband." A loud collective gasp rippled through the grand ballroom. Whispers immediately ignited among the tables of investors and executives. Kiara stood absolutely still just a few feet away from him, her champagne flute held lightly in her hands. Darius looked directly at the crowd, entirely ignoring his ex-wife. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew the optics. He was a black man standing in a wrinkled suit, speaking to a room full of highly successful black entrepreneurs and leaders. He was going to weaponize their empathy. He was going to twist the narrative so violently that Kiara would look like a ruthless corporate villain. "I know you all see a powerful, brilliant CEO tonight," Darius continued, his voice cracking perfectly on cue. "You see a woman who just bought a massive distribution empire. But what you do not see is the absolute devastation she left in her wake to get here. You do not see the family she completely destroyed. You do not see the loyal husband she stepped on to build her fortune." He let his words hang in the heavy air. He could hear the sharp intakes of breath from the surrounding tables. The wealthy elites who had just been toasting Kiara's brilliance were now shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some of the older investors exchanged uncertain glances. Darius fed on their confusion. He knew that in high society, reputation was absolutely everything. A scandal like this, an accusation of ruthless financial abuse against a supportive spouse, was a corporate death sentence. He was effectively holding a lit match over her entire brand. "For 10 years, I gave this woman absolutely everything," Darius proclaimed, his voice rising in manufactured passionate agony. "I worked myself to the bone to provide for our home. I supported her dreams when nobody else believed in her. I was her foundation. And the very second she tasted real power, the very moment she got her hands on real money, she discarded me like absolute trash." He scanned the front row, locking eyes with the mayor of Houston. He wanted these powerful people to see a man unfairly stripped of his dignity. He wanted them to doubt the incredible woman standing on the stage. "She filed secret legal documents," Darius shouted, his tone morphing into righteous indignation. "She hid assets. She orchestrated a hostile takeover of my own home while I was at work. She did not just break her marriage vows. She executed a calculated, malicious financial slaughter. She systematically stripped a hard-working black man of his entire wealth and his dignity just to fund her corporate ambitions. She stole my family, and she left me on the street with absolutely nothing." Darius raised his head, looking out at the shocked faces of the elite crowd. He let a single tear gather in his eye, a masterpiece of narcissistic manipulation. "I did not come here tonight to cause a scene," Darius lied smoothly, his voice dropping to a desperate, pleading whisper. "I came here because I am broken. I came here because the woman standing on this stage, the woman you are all applauding, took my life, my legacy, and my heart and crushed them to build her empire. I just want my wife back. I just want the woman I loved before the money turned her into someone I do not even recognize." Darius lowered the microphone, letting his shoulders slump in a posture of complete defeat. He turned his head slowly to look at Kiara. He was waiting for the inevitable breakdown. He expected her to grab the podium for support. He expected her hands to shake. He expected the quiet, submissive woman he used to dominate to crumble under the crushing weight of public humiliation. In his delusional, twisted mind, he had just masterfully cornered her. The crowd was watching. The press was watching. She had to surrender. But Kiara did not run. She did not cry. She did not move a single muscle. She remained perfectly still, her expression an impenetrable mask of pure, unadulterated power. The soft ambient lighting illuminated the sharp, elegant lines of her face. She did not look like a woman who had just been ambushed. She looked like a predator observing prey that had foolishly wandered into her territory. From the shadows of the ballroom, 4 massive security guards dressed in immaculate black suits sprinted toward the stage, their heavy boots thudding against the polished marble floor. They reached the stairs ready to tackle Darius and drag him out of the venue by his throat. Kiara did not even look at the guards. She simply raised her left hand holding up a single elegant finger. The security team immediately froze. They stopped dead in their tracks at the base of the stairs, waiting for their employer's explicit command. The silent, absolute obedience of the massive guards sent a sudden chill down Darius' spine. That single silent command shattered Darius' entire strategy. The realization hit him like a freight train. She was not panicking because she was not afraid of him. She had absolute total control over the room, the security, and the narrative. Kiara stood bathed in the bright stage lights, entirely unbothered. She did not yell, she did not defend herself against his ridiculous fabricated accusations. She took a slow, deliberate sip from her crystal champagne flute. The poise she radiated was absolutely terrifying. She was not a panicked housewife. She was a corporate titan dealing with a minor, unpredictable pest. She smoothly handed her half-empty glass to a stunned, paralyzed waiter standing near the podium. Then she began to walk. She did not rush. Her movements were fluid, graceful, and completely devoid of fear. Her emerald green gown swept across the stage as she closed the distance between them. The sharp clicking of her heels against the stage floor sounded like a terrifying countdown. Darius felt a sudden cold knot of genuine terror form in his stomach. This was not the reaction he had scripted. The woman walking toward him did not look ashamed or cornered. She looked absolutely lethal. Kiara stopped right at the edge of the stage, stopping exactly 2 feet away from him. The physical contrast between them was devastating. Darius was standing there sweating profusely, his budget suit wrinkled, his collar stained, panting into a stolen microphone like a desperate lunatic. Kiara was immaculate, her skin glowing, her diamonds sparkling, her posture radiating supreme, flawless control. She looked down at him. Her dark eyes were utterly devoid of warmth. There was no anger in her gaze. There was no sadness. There was no lingering heartbreak or vulnerability. There was only the freezing absolute zero of total indifference. She looked at him the way a person might look at a piece of unidentifiable trash stuck to the bottom of their expensive designer shoe. Darius opened his mouth to speak, to double down on his victim narrative, to force her to react, but the sheer freezing intensity of her stare completely paralyzed his vocal cords. The heavy black microphone felt incredibly slippery in his shaking hand. The grand, desperate illusion he had constructed during his miserable flight from Atlanta evaporated instantly under her icy gaze. He suddenly realized with sickening absolute clarity that he had not trapped Kiara Washington at all. He had willingly, happily walked directly into her execution chamber. The silence in the crystal pavilion was so absolute, it felt heavy enough to crush bone. Darius stood frozen on the elevated stage, clutching the stolen microphone with slick, sweating palms. He had thrown his desperate grenade into the center of the room, expecting a chaotic explosion of tears and panic. Instead, he was met with the freezing, terrifying composure of a woman who had already won the war. Kiara did not reach for his microphone. She did not raise her voice. She did not break her formidable posture. She simply reached up and tapped the small, discreet lavalier microphone clipped to the neckline of her emerald gown. The tiny device immediately synced with the massive venue sound system. When she spoke, her voice was smooth, rich, and entirely devoid of emotion. It echoed through the grand ballroom, cutting through the tension with surgical precision. Darius Kiara began her tone conversational but sharp as shattered glass. You always did possess a profound flair for amateur dramatics. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the front tables where the elite investors sat. The mayor of Houston leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms and watching the spectacle unfold with intense fascination. Darius felt a hot flush of embarrassment crawl up his neck. He tried to raise his microphone to interrupt her, to wrestle back control of the narrative, but his hands stubbornly refused to move. He was entirely paralyzed by her absolute dominance. Let us address the very public fairy tale you just attempted to spin for my esteemed guests. Kiara continued pacing slowly along the edge of the stage. Her green gown moved like liquid emeralds under the stage lights. You claim I stole your family. You claim I orchestrated a malicious financial slaughter. You stood before this room of brilliant, successful entrepreneurs and claimed I stripped you of your wealth. Kiara stopped walking and turned to face him directly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I did not strip you of your wealth, Darius. Kiara stated, her voice ringing with undeniable, absolute authority. You never had any. You lived on my corporate expense account for 5 years. The house, the car, the lifestyle, it was all mine. The ballroom let out a collective, synchronized gasp. The wealthy executives who had been shifting uncomfortably just moments ago now leaned forward, entirely captivated by the brutal, unfiltered truth. You did not build my empire, Kiara declared, her words striking him like physical blows. You did not support my dreams. The luxury mansion you bragged about owning was a corporate lease paid in full by TechCore Empire, LLC. The expensive tailored suits you wore were purchased with my capital. The luxury vehicles you drove were registered to my company fleet. The lifestyle you paraded around Atlanta pretending to be a self-made king was entirely and unequivocally funded by my hard work. Darius felt the blood drain completely from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The grand romantic victim narrative he had meticulously crafted during his flight was disintegrating into ash. She was not just rejecting his apology, she was publicly, methodically dismantling his entire fabricated identity in front of the most powerful people in the state of Texas. You contributed absolutely nothing to my ascent. Kiara continued, her voice steady and relentless. Your only contribution to our marriage was serving as a walking, breathing tax write-off. When you decided to disgrace our vows and humiliate me, I simply stopped funding your delusions. I evicted you from my property. I impounded my vehicle. I cut off your access to my money. That is not theft, Darius. That is simply taking out the trash. A low murmur of shock and dark amusement swept through the crowd. Women in designer gowns exchanged knowing, triumphant smiles. Powerful men shook their heads in utter disgust, looking at Darius as if he were a pathetic, tragic joke. The humiliation was absolute and suffocating. Darius could literally feel the collective lack of respect radiating from the hundreds of guests staring at him. He was completely exposed. The fake executive, the pretend king, was standing under the brightest spotlight in Houston, stripped entirely bare. He wanted to run. He desperately needed to turn around and flee through the service doors back into the dark, humid alleyway. But his legs were locked, and the 4 massive security guards were still waiting at the base of the stairs, watching him with predatory anticipation. Kiara was not finished. She turned her attention away from the trembling, broken man on the stage and looked toward the back of the ballroom. She offered a subtle, sharp nod to her lead executive assistant, who was standing near the main audio-visual control board. The assistant immediately pressed a sequence of keys on her tablet. The massive crystal chandeliers above them dimmed slightly, casting the room into a dramatic cinematic shadow. Behind Kiara, the enormous 50-foot projector screen covering the back wall of the stage suddenly hummed to life. The screen illuminated the ballroom with a crisp, bright white light. Displayed in massive high-definition text was the final execution page of a corporate acquisition contract. The legal document was covered in official seals, corporate stamps, and highlighted clauses. The crowd stared at the massive screen, rapidly reading the dense legal text. Darius turned his head slowly, his neck stiff with terror. He looked up at the projection. Printed in bold black ink right at the top of the document was the official logo of Apex Southern Logistics. It was the supreme parent conglomerate. It was the massive corporate entity that owned the regional sales firm where Darius was currently employed. It was the company that signed his meager paychecks and provided his basic health insurance. Right beneath the Apex logo was the unmistakable signature of Kiara Washington, finalizing the total acquisition of the entire company. For those of you who missed the press release earlier this evening, Kiara announced, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. Soul Spice Empire, LLC has officially acquired Apex Southern Logistics. We now own the entire regional distribution chain. The ballroom erupted into spontaneous applause, but Kiara immediately raised her hand, demanding total silence. The crowd instantly quieted, eager to hear her next words. Kiara turned slowly back to Darius. The cold indifference in her eyes had sharpened into a lethal professional executioner. Darius stared at the massive screen, his brain completely short-circuiting. The reality of the document was too massive for his fragile ego to process. She had not bought the company to get his attention. She had not bought the company to send him a romantic message. She had bought the company because it was a brilliant strategic move for her business. His existence was entirely incidental. He was nothing but a microscopic, insignificant ant, standing in the path of a massive corporate juggernaut. "By the way," Kiara said, her voice echoing clearly through the silent, spellbound hall. "Since the ink dried on this acquisition yesterday, I am officially the owner of your employer. And as your new CEO, I have reviewed your performance and ethical violations." Darius felt his heart stop beating. The heavy black microphone finally slipped from his sweating fingers, crashing loudly onto the acrylic podium and rolling onto the stage floor. The loud feedback screech echoed briefly, but Kiara did not even flinch. "I have reviewed your abysmal attendance record," Kiara stated, her tone entirely devoid of pity. "I have reviewed the extensive list of inappropriate expense reports and unauthorized absences you accumulated while you were busy running around Atlanta destroying your own life." She took one final step toward him, closing the distance. She looked directly into his wide, terrified, bloodshot eyes. "Darius Washington." Kiara delivered the fatal blow, her voice ringing with absolute chilling finality. "You are fired, effective immediately." For one singular, breathless second, the grand ballroom was entirely silent. The magnitude of the public execution hung heavily in the crisp air. And then the entire room erupted. The crowd of elite investors, politicians, and executives exploded into a deafening roar of applause. Cheers, shouts, and stunned gasps echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The sheer ruthlessness of the termination, the absolute brilliant poetry of the moment, resonated deeply with the crowd of high-powered business leaders. They raised their champagne flutes toward the stage, toasting the undisputed queen of the Southern culinary empire. Darius stood frozen, his jaw slack, his eyes vacant. The final thread holding his sanity together snapped completely. He had no money. He had no home. He had no family. He had no legacy. And now he had no job. He was completely, entirely, and permanently ruined. The woman he had relentlessly mocked for being boring had just publicly orchestrated his absolute annihilation in front of the entire corporate world. Kiara did not wait for him to respond. She turned away from him, dismissing his existence entirely. She snapped her fingers, pointing sharply toward the 4 security guards waiting at the bottom of the stairs. "Get this trespasser off my stage and off my property," Kiara commanded, her voice cutting through the applause. "And make sure he leaves the catering vest he stole. He does not even work here anymore." The security guards moved with terrifying explosive speed. They vaulted up the stairs, closing in on Darius before he could even register their approach. 2 massive hands grabbed his shoulders, violently spinning him around. Another guard grabbed him by the belt, lifting him almost entirely off the ground. "Wait!" Darius choked out his voice, barely a weak, pathetic whisper against the roaring applause of the crowd. "Kiara, wait. I have nothing. Please." Kiara did not turn around. She did not look back. She walked smoothly toward the center of the stage, picking up a fresh glass of champagne from a waiting server. The guards dragged Darius forcefully across the stage. They did not care about his dignity. They did not care about his ruined suit. They hauled him backward through the heavy velvet doors, shoving him brutally back into the chaotic, sweltering service kitchen. The executive chefs and busy waiters barely glanced up as the screaming, struggling man was hauled past their prep stations. They dragged him down the narrow hallway, kicking open the heavy metal service doors. The humid, oppressive Texas night air hit Darius in the face as they threw him violently out into the dark alleyway. He crashed onto the hard concrete, scraping his hands and tearing the knees of his trousers. One of the guards roughly ripped the stolen black catering vest right off his back, tossing it onto a pile of empty plastic crates. "Do not ever come back here," The lead security guard growled, his hand resting heavily on his radio. "If we see your face within a mile of Miss Washington, we will have you arrested for criminal trespassing. Have a nice night." The heavy metal service doors slammed shut, locking with a loud, definitive click. Darius lay on the hot, filthy concrete of the alleyway, staring up at the narrow strip of starry night sky visible between the towering downtown skyscrapers. The faint, muffled sound of the live jazz orchestra, starting a new, upbeat song, filtered through the thick brick walls of the Crystal Pavilion. He was alone in the dark, surrounded by garbage, smelling the faint stench of the city alleyway. His pockets were entirely empty. His phone screen was cracked. He was hundreds of miles away from an apartment he did not even own. Inside the grand ballroom, Kiara Washington raised her crystal champagne flute toward the cheering crowd, her smile radiant and completely victorious. To new beginnings, Kiara toasted, her voice ringing clear and triumphant over the sound system. And to building empires that no one can ever tear down. The elite crowd roared their approval, their glasses clinking in perfect harmony. The launch party resumed its electric, high-class rhythm, completely untethered from the miserable, ruined man lying in the shadows outside. Kiara took a sip of her champagne, tasting the sweet, undeniable flavor of absolute, permanent victory. She had finally closed the book on Darius Washington, and the rest of her brilliant, beautiful life was just beginning.